Chapter 289. Whoosh. The knight marionette's sword slashed across the Inferno Tyrant's chest with a whistling wind. Although it was not even half a meter away from the Inferno Tyrant, the violent and swift wind pressure brought about by the violent power still broke through the dense layer of flames on the surface of the Inferno Tyrant's body, leaving a white sword mark on his chest. Just as the sword slashed across, the tower shield in the knight marionette's other hand slammed towards him like a city wall. Before the shield even reached him, the strong wind pressure had already suppressed the flames on the Inferno Tyrant's body. At this moment, even the air, which was usually ignored by others, seemed to have become solid. The energy reserve in Grimm's mind dropped by 2%. He had no choice but to give up on the idea of taking on the knight marionette's shield bash head-on and took a few steps back. As he retreated, he threw out a series of bursting fireballs in a frenzy, blocking the enemy's advance. His eyes shot out two laser-like rays of light, slicing horizontally at the knight marionette's neck. Bursting fireballs exploded between the two of them. The violent flame shockwaves made the two big guys feel like they were small boats sailing against the current. It was difficult for them to move forward. The bursting fireballs with an elemental strength of 70 degrees were a big threat even to official wizards, but they did not cause any damage to the knight marionette. On one side was a metal knight marionette, which could ignore damage below 80 degrees. Damage above 80 degrees had to be reduced by the special elemental damage reduction of magic iron alloys. Therefore, without an attack of more than 100 degrees, one could not expect to cause any visible damage to the knight marionette. On the other side, the Inferno Tyrant was immune to low to moderate fire damage. Only the knight marionette's violent physical attacks could cause irreversible energy loss. Therefore, Grimm's bursting fireballs were not meant to cause any damage to the enemy, but to use the shockwaves after the bursting fireballs to interrupt the knight marionette's continuous battle techniques, so that he would not be killed by it. This was actually the scariest thing about high-level knights. Once you were entangled by their battle techniques, it was impossible for you to be slapped away by a shield or sent flying by a sword. As long as you were hit by their battle skills, you would feel that everything had already gone out of your control. You would only tremble as you retreated step by step. Then, you would be cut to death by their continuous fast swords. In the previous round, the Inferno Tyrant that Grimm controlled had been unable to dodge in time and had been hit by the magic marionette knight. It had lost 17% of its energy reserves. That was why Grimm had been preparing fireballs at all times in order to interrupt the marionette knight's continuous attacks when he was about to use his sword skills. Using his elemental vision, Grimm was able to analyze the movement of the energy within the magic marionette's body. Whenever the energy in the marionette knight's body started to gather at its right wrist, shoulder, and waist, it meant that it was about to launch a spinning slash. Whenever energy began to gather at its feet and back, it meant that it was about to charge. And when the energy gathered at both his feet and his right wrist at the same time, it meant that it might be a sudden stab. After such a long battle, the AI chip had completely captured and analyzed all the battle techniques and techniques that the opponent had. The price that the Inferno Tyrant had to pay was 85% of its energy. Ever since his opponent's battle techniques had been analyzed, the Inferno Tyrant had never been hit by his opponent's battle techniques again. Instead, every time the opponent was about to launch a battle technique, the Inferno Tyrant would escape from the position of being attacked, as if he had foreseen it. Then, he would take advantage of the moment when the battle technique was launched to repeatedly attack the joints of the opponent's right leg. There had originally been a disc-shaped protective kneecap there, but after Grimm's continuous efforts, it had been burnt through. This way, the marionette knight's ball-shaped joints were inevitably exposed. Perhaps the puppet master had given some strict orders, or perhaps the marionette knight's own battle instinct were playing tricks on it. After realizing that its leg joints had lost their protection, the marionette knight once again picked up the giant tower shield and began to deliberately protect its lower limbs. However, this also meant that it had lost its original nimbleness. Its movement and attack speed had decreased by more than 40%. Grimm also took the opportunity to instruct the Inferno Tyrant to jump from the inside to the outside. He began to exert his strength from a distance, using lava fireballs and molten core explosions to repeatedly attack the sluggish Marionette Knight. Pure elemental spells were not bad at all when fighting against a large metallic lump like the Marionette Knight. Moreover, single-target spells like lava fireballs, which had both physical and elemental attacks, were more condensed. Of course, the effects of a light of blazing flames were not bad either. However, it was more difficult to condense the light of blazing flames, and it required continuous guidance. It was very easy for the Marionette Knight to seize the opportunity to beat it up. Therefore, after trying a few times, Grimm could only helplessly give up and focus on using lava fireballs to wreak havoc on the opponent. In order to reduce his energy consumption, Grimm did not even use his favorite flame barrier. He only used pure flame leap and lava fireballs. Even if only 2 or 3 of his attacks hit the enemy, it would still cause a certain amount of damage to the Marionette Knight. Moreover, the lava splashed by the lava fireballs was sticky. If it stuck to the Marionette Knight's body for a long time, it would also cause some continuous damage. The debris formed after the solidified lava collapse became the greatest enemy of the mechanical gears. It was very easy for them to get stuck in the gaps and distort the movements of the Marionette Knight. At this point in the battle, almost everyone with eyes could see that the Marionette Knight's glory was no longer there. Although it still had the initiative in the battle, its damage to the Inferno Tyrant was also plummeting. Many times, it could only chase after the Burning Mans, but all over the battlefield. After the Inferno Tyrant got through the difficult battle pattern at the beginning, he had already completely grasped the rhythm of the battle. He used the battlefield flexibly to move around and used the endless lava fireballs to gnaw at the Marionette Knight's body bit by bit. Although the surface of the Marionette Knight's body had some traces of melting, the rest of its body was still intact. However, when it did not successfully destroy the crystal core in the elemental puppet's body in close combat, it also indicated that it had already lost control of the battle. Moreover, its injured right leg was still a worrying hidden danger. With the giant tower shield, it could protect this hidden danger, but could not catch up to the enemy. If it abandoned the tower shield, it might be able to entangle the enemy again, but the hidden danger, for a moment, even Luno, who was constantly giving orders at the side of the battlefield, began to worry and hesitate. However, at this moment, Grimm began to take the initiative to attack. It could not be helped. The Inferno Tyrant's energy consumption had already reached 89%. It was simply impossible for him to defeat the enemy through a marathon battle. He could only end the battle quickly. Unknowingly, a flame scepter had already appeared in the hands of the Inferno Tyrant. With a bang, a pillar of fire shot up, and the tall and imposing body of the Fire Djinn appeared in the battlefield. Everyone outside the battlefield was shocked at the same time. After all, the Fire Djinn's nearly 10-meter-tall body was too deceptive and intimidating. However, when the mages sensed the Fire Djinn's strength level through their perception, they all shook their heads and sighed. In a battle between marionettes of this level, what use could a quasi-wizard level fire elemental creature have? However, before everyone could think too much, the Fire Djinn had already lowered its body and pounced towards the Marionette Knight with its huge fist. Distract? Self-destruct? Or perhaps it was just, before Luno could give the Marionette Knight the order to defend or attack, the Fire Djinn that had pounced close to the opponent had already self-destructed. The abrupt explosion of a ring of flames instantly engulfed the surroundings of the Marionette Knight, turning the earth and sky into a chaotic sea of fire. Moreover, as the violent flames and the terrifying flow of flames collided wantonly, a cage made of pure elemental flames suddenly appeared and trapped the Marionette Knight within it. In the next second, the Inferno Tyrant's terrifying body that was wreathed in flames appeared beside the flame cage. A strange smile appeared on his blackish-red face of flames. Then, a powerful sorcery book with a black cover suddenly appeared in his hands. The secret voodoo poison scroll. As a soul equipment, When Grimm transferred his consciousness into the core of the Inferno Tyrant, the secret voodoo poison scroll could also be used by the Inferno Tyrant. A vigorous and deep roar sounded in the void. The Inferno Tyrant quickly guided the powerful spells in the secret voodoo poison scroll, and the molten fire core exploded one after another on the Marionette Knight's body like a chain of fireballs. The attack power of a molten fire core was as high as 191 degrees, and each one of them was enough to instantly kill a magus who had not made sufficient preparations for defense. At this moment, 6 extremely powerful molten fire core exploded inside the flame cage at the same time, and the superimposed effect of the spells formed reached an effect that was even more terrifying to Magi. The terrifying temperature of the flames nearing 10,000 degrees appeared in the core area of the molten fire core, and the damage to the Marionette Knight was enough to be fatal. Seeing that the situation was not good, the Marionette Knight frantically used a giant tower shield to cover its body, and then gathered all its energy to break through the flame cage in one fell swoop. Finally, it managed to escape with great difficulty. Unfortunately, with its injured leg dragging it down, its speed of escape was not fast enough, and it was still caught up by the terrifying flow of flames that swept out. The Marionette Knight, who had previously been able to withstand a temperature of 7,000 degrees, really could not withstand it anymore at this moment. The surface of the giant tower shield that protected its body had already been scorched red and softened. Molten iron continuously flowed down like lava, causing the shield's thickness to become thinner and thinner. Finally, the tower shield was corroded, and the terrifyingly high-temperature flow of flames blew on the Marionette Knight's body, burning the originally smooth and exquisite armor into a piece of pit. All the patterns and edges of the armor had already melted and softened, and then, like hot wax, it softened into mud. The Marionette Knight was struggling to escape, but it suddenly felt that the light in front of it had dimmed. A tall, black and red figure blocked in front of it. With an explosive boom, the tall figure's monstrous black and red lava hand forcefully broke into the already softened Marionette Knight's chest, and then forcibly pulled out a mechanical heart with magic patterns. Having suddenly lost the control center, the Marionette Knight's body suddenly stiffened, and then its entire body became bright red. Chapter 290. The victor had been decided. When Grimm walked out of the arena with the Inferno Tyrant, he was greeted by the overjoyed wizard Nunnally, as well as Angus and the others who were watching with smiles on their faces. Behind them, the Magi from the Greto family were all glaring at them, their faces filled with murderous intent. Both parties' gazes were focused on Grimm, who was full of joy, and the terrifying fiery figure. No one paid any attention to the dazed Runo puppet master who was standing beside Grimm. All right, the victor of today's arcane competition has been decided. The silver-robed magus stood up to be the peacemaker. The shop at 167 Champs-Élysées Street will continue to be operated by the Byron family. The Greto family must hand over the fine for losing the challenge to the Byron family within 3 days. If the fine is not paid within the time limit, the Greto family will be expelled from the Silver Alliance, and their current properties will be confiscated and auctioned off. I hope you won't have to do that. All right, the event here is over. You can all leave now. With that, the silver-robed magus glanced at Grimm and his magic puppet before leaving without another word. Let's go. Let's go back and celebrate. Even a sinister guy like Wizard Angus couldn't help but smile like a blossoming flower. The Byron family's importance in this competition was self-evident. Escorting Grimm, the Byron family's Magi happily returned to the family's encampment. In the arena, Wizard Nunnally sneered at the ashen-faced bald man. Nagu, we can settle our grudges in the future, but I hope to see the resources you promised as soon as possible. You know very well where I am, and I'll be waiting for your news. Looking at Nunnally, who turned around and left after she finished speaking, the leader of the Greto family was so enraged that the muscles on his body tightened, producing popping sounds that sounded like popcorn popping. Nunnally, you bastard, I want you dead. I'll make sure you die a horrible death. However, No matter how angry this Grade 2 Magus was, he still did not dare to start a fight here. Although the arcane sorcerers of the Silver Alliance did not have much combat power, the sheer number of voodoo puppets they had was terrifying. If he were to attack non-Naili, not only would he not be able to escape from this sky city, even his family would be destroyed. Fortunately, the Greto family had already won 2 of the previous arcane competitions. Although they were both in remote areas of the Outer Ring and were not as prosperous as the Avenue of Champagne, it was enough for the family to establish themselves here for the time being. But when he thought about the large amount of resources he would have to pay to the Byron family in 3 days, Gu couldn't help but feel his heart ache once more. The battle in the arena made Grimm famous in the Outer Ring District 12 overnight. The entire Outer Ring was like a huge clock, and the Champs-Élysées, where the Byron family was located at the position of 12 o'clock, so it was named after the 12th district. There were 10 to 20 shops of various sizes here, and each of them had the backing of a famous wizard family on the continent. Hence, it was all thanks to the Inferno Tyrant, that they could remember Grimm's name. To be honest, outsiders like Grimm were the most sought after in the Outer Ring. The price of hiring them was much cheaper than hiring those arcane masters. Although their combat power was uneven, if they made the right bet, they could immediately revive their family and continue to exist in Sky City. Since Grimm was able to represent the Byron family this time, perhaps he could represent his family next time. Hence, every Outer Ring sorcerer family was willing to befriend a quasi-arcane sorcerer with a bright future ahead of time. Deep into the night, when the dark curtain of night enveloped the entire Sky City, the Byron family's base was once again brightly lit. A small celebratory banquet was held in the hall on the first floor of the base. All 17 merchant companies in District 12 had sent their representatives, and everyone gathered together to celebrate the Byron family's victory. As the arcane competitions ended, most of the 17 merchant companies in District 12 were lucky enough to survive. However, there were still 5 new families that replaced the original wizard families. Hence, using this opportunity, in the Byron family's secret rooms and banquets, countless conspiracies and transactions were carried out in private. The old families needed to reach new agreements, and the new families needed to make appropriate concessions or show off their military might if they wanted to enter their circle. As for the weaker families, if they wanted to protect themselves, they could only try to form alliances. Hence, in this kind of banquet, the representatives of every sorcerer family and the resident sorcerers were very busy. They were busy entering one secret room after another, meeting with one authority after another. Those who could easily stay at the banquet were mostly new sorcerers that had been sent by their families to Sky City to learn tactics and improve their understanding. The banquet hall was not very big, but the decorations had its own unique style. The floor and walls were all decorated with luminous rocks. Even without any lighting, the hall was still bright at night. More than 10 dining tables were placed in a corner of the hall, gold and silver utensils filling the tables. As for the dishes on the table, there were pan-fried veal kidneys, quail stuffed with spices and fruits, pastry pancakes made with lark and partridge meat, beef cooked with wine and onions, dormice soaked in honey. The ones in charge of serving the sorcerers in the hall were beautiful women of different races with unique appearances. Among them, there was a slender and lithe figure, a delicate face, gray cat ears on the top of her head, and a furry tail on her back. There was a tall and strong figure, with a perky chest and perky buttocks. There was a small demonic horn on her head, and her body was fair and sexy. She had bat wings on her back, a long bone tail, and hoofed feet. Apart from them, there was also a female elf with a slender body and long pointed ears. There was also a tiger girl with a strong figure, a little fur on the side of her face, and a somewhat tyrannical and rebellious temperament. Grimm even saw a dwarf girl who was only half a meter tall. Among these beauties, of course, there was no exception. Under their thin clothes, Grimm found small rune brands on their shoulders. In the middle of these rune brands was the Byron family's emblem, with a circle of small runes around it for sealing, positioning, and other unknown functions. Grimm had long heard that the sorcerer world was a top-level plane that had enslaved thousands of secondary planes, so it had all kinds of resources, and the slaves they captured were from countless races. When he was an apprentice, he naturally did not have the chance to come into contact with these high-level resources. But now, as he slowly grew and became an upper-class sorcerer, these resources that were usually only available to high-grade sorcerers began to appear in front of him. If these beauties were placed in a different secondary plane, they might be revered and noble princesses or queens of some enslaved race. However, in this brightly lit sorcerer family banquet, they were slaves and maids who could do whatever they wanted. In the banquet hall, some young wizards and witches surrounded them and commented on their appearances. Some even took off their clothes from time to personally examine them, looking very interested. As a young and handsome sorcerer, Grimm was especially liked by the young female sorcerers. 3 to 5 young witches from different clans surrounded him in the middle, talking to him with hot words. It had to be said that after becoming a sorcerer, the moral restrictions that bound these young men and women had almost disappeared. As the up-and-coming talents carefully cultivated by the family, their future was bright. Therefore, before the long and tedious path of cultivation as a sorcerer, they would rather enjoy life, enjoy power, enjoy good food, and enjoy sex. They were still young and did not have the qualifications to enter the upper ranks of their families, so they had a lot of time and energy to pursue pleasure. Therefore, according to Grimm's rumors, the private lives of all young sorcerers were equally decadent and extravagant. Every young wizard and witch kept countless handsome men and beautiful women in their private houses for their own enjoyment. However, those were only their objects of pleasure. If they really wanted to find a suitable partner, they could only choose from the opposite sex sorcerers of the same rank. As long as 2 young sorcerers liked each other, they could get together in minutes. Therefore, when it came to pleasure and sex, the boldness and straightforwardness of these female sorcerers was enough to make Grimm's 1,000-year-old house feel helpless. However, in the banquet hall, there were other small groups of people. One of them was the circle of bloodline sorcerers, which was dominated by bloodlines. Those who could set foot in this banquet hall were the best among the bloodline sorcerers. Their characteristic was the rich aura of their bloodlines, which were very obvious signs of atavism. The Sinos family, which ran the Black Rose Trading Company, was a family of bloodline sorcerers. Their inherited bloodline was the Shadow Snake, a terrifying shadow creature that could reach grade 6. Therefore, all the sorcerers trained by the Sinos family had a black snake head on their head, regardless of whether they were male or female. Their bodies were also faintly blurred, as if they were constantly being protected and enveloped by darkness magic. Obviously, these bloodline sorcerers did not like to have close contact with sorcerers of other races. When they chose a spouse or lover, they only considered the purity of the other party's bloodline and strength. As for appearance and personality, they were just secondary attributes. Apart from the group of bloodline sorcerers with snake heads, there was also a group of mutated sorcerers in the hall whose bodies had been deeply modified. They were either beastified, undead, or mechanized. Every sorcerer's body had more or less been modified by witchcraft. Chapter 291. You're very strong and full of energy. Vinny from the Clyde family placed her hand on Grimm's chest and licked her red lips with a smile. Yes, and more importantly, he smells so good. Carolyn narrowed her eyes as she gently sniffed, revealing an intoxicated expression on her face. As for the rest of the female sorcerers, they were chatting and laughing as they surrounded Grimm and started to gossip. Vinny and Carolyn were both very tall, with exquisite features and sexy bodies. Their clothes were also very revealing. Their soft robes showed off their curvaceous curves, and the bold cut on their chests exposed most of their full, white breast to the passionate gazes of the male magi. Seriously speaking, a new Magus's appearance and figure were at their peak in the 100 to 200 years after their advancement. Young magi at this time also paid special attention to their appearance and were willing to invest a lot of time and resources on it. Therefore, the young magi who could step into this banquet hall, regardless of gender, were all handsome men and beautiful women. It could be seen that they were very familiar with each other after spending so much time here. Now that a new face like Grimm had suddenly appeared, many young magi started to chase after him. Moreover, Grimm was very different from the other magi in every aspect. Grimm had a young and delicate face, black eyes, and dark red long hair. He was dressed in a free and easy skin-tight leather suit, which accentuated his burly figure that was 2 meters tall and looked even more fit and beautiful. The aura of wisdom and the aura of a cold and evil magus mixed together to form a unique and evil smell. Grimm calmly responded to the enthusiasm and straightforwardness of the female magi while listening to Wizard Angus's recommendation in his mind. This Vinny is actually not bad. She's pretty, has a hot body, and is very straightforward. As long as you're willing, you can sleep with her tonight. That Carolyn is the granddaughter of the Tier 2 sorcerer, Lorilla. If you can make her fall head over heels for you, I can guarantee that you'll be able to do whatever you want in the Ariford area in the future. The one on your left, wearing a yellow low-cut evening gown, is the most unrestrained of them all. With your methods, it won't be a problem to convince her and Winnie to accompany you. While listening to Angus, Grimm looked around the hall and saw Angus talking to 2 prospective witches in a corner. Noticing that Grimm was looking at him, he even had the time to raise his glass to greet him with a wicked smile. What the hell is this? A bunch of loose, lascivious, big-bellied, and uninhibited women. Although they all pretended to be arrogant and noble at the moment. If he flipped through their private collections, he would probably find groups of male pets and strong slaves in their secret residences. Going to bed with such people, wasn't me playing with them, or were they playing with me? Although he wasn't obsessed with mental cleanliness, when faced with a group of mature witches, Grimm found it difficult to immerse himself in them like they did. Therefore, facing such a situation, Grimm responded to them politely and calmly while crying for help in his heart. This was truly a torturous night. This was truly a torturous night. Who can come and save me? At the same time, in a different place, Alice was also looking up at the sky full of stars, letting out a sorrowful and desperate howl. Mushroom Hut. At night, the thick fog that covered the dark swamp all year round would disperse a little, allowing the bright moonlight to shine into the hut, adding a sense of coldness and serenity to the place. At this moment, Alice had been stripped of all her clothes and stuffed into a boiling pot of soup. She was silently suffering there. As for the soup in the pot, the steaming hot soup had already turned green. Moreover, it was a wretched green. The witch Leona, who was almost as tall as a dwarf, was standing on a high stool, stirring the soup with a big spoon. From time to time, she would take out some strange powders or unknown substances from her waist pouch and throw them into the pot of soup. From time to time, she would raise the big spoon to taste the soup and throw more things into the pot when she was not satisfied. Things like bat feces, mermaid tears, werewolf eyeballs, corpse demon shroud powder, ghost ashes, black dragon saliva, demon hunter spider venom sac. In short, listening to the mentally unstable old witch mumbling something while throwing these mysterious things into the pot of soup like they were free, Alice was almost scared to death. To be honest, when she first came to the Mushroom Hut 7 days ago, Alice was deeply attracted by the smell of the strange soup and always had the inexplicable urge to eat it. But when she became a part of the soup, being cooked by the old witch every day, it was already good enough that Alice did not have a mental breakdown and become crazy. Vaguely, she also had a feeling that the old witch did not intend to turn her into a delicacy, but she was using her for some secret experiment, because every day, the old witch would use a large syringe to draw out a tube of her blood and then throw her into the dirty soup. It was difficult for Alice to pry into the secrets behind the other party's every move, but it was only 7 days, and she was already full of disgust for this kind of experimental subject life as a prisoner. And she was even more disgusted by the disgusting materials that completely submerged her. Compared to the rigorous and meticulous system of the arcane sorcerers, the witch's inheritance was usually somewhat inexplicable, sometimes even to the point of being ridiculous. Look at what kind of materials the arcane sorcerers used. Star iron, obsidian, Horus meteorite with good anti-magic properties, Mandisur alloy with high hardness, underground adamantine, magic iron alloy with good ductility, mithril with high magic conductivity, burning stone, sky sapphire, shadow song purple jade with natural elemental properties. Each of them was classified according to the characteristics of the elements, according to the types of materials, methods of use, and precautions, and could be further subdivided into different subjects. There were tens of thousands of sorcery materials, so there was a specialized subject that detailed the characteristics of each material, the place of origin, the method of collection, the precautions when storing them, the method of unsealing when using them. Everything was compiled into a book. It became a basic subject that all arcane sorcerers had to master, material science. And these witches, each of them had their own secret hidden inheritance, and they never communicated with each other. As for the witchcraft materials they used, each of them was incredible. Most of the time, they knew clearly what materials were needed to cast a curse through their inherited knowledge, but not many witches could figure out why these materials were needed. Because they refused to disclose the witchcraft knowledge in their own system, and by nature did not like to deal with outsiders. So all along, the northern witches had their own set of knowledge inheritance system, which was incompatible with the mainstream sorcerer system of the sorcerer continent. Therefore, to other sorcerers, these northern witches were all somewhat neurotic, and the abilities they possessed were quite strange. Although they were not necessarily very powerful, they were very difficult to deal with. Very difficult to deal with. The curses they were good at often involved extremely high-end plane laws, and it was extremely difficult to break. Therefore, if they encountered a northern witch who had a true inheritance, even a sorcerer whose level was higher than theirs would not be willing to easily make an enemy of them. Alice crossed her arms in front of her chest, and her whole body curled up into a ball in the green soup. Except for a small head that was exposed, the rest of her body was covered by the green, sticky soup. Her small face was bitter, and she endured the strange power that constantly penetrated into her body through her nostrils and skin. Every time she could not bear the churning in her stomach and wanted to keep her mouth and nose away from a little bit of the stinky soup, the black snake hanging down from the beam, with its tail hanging down, would hiss and stick out its tongue to threaten her. Therefore, Alice could only fiercely bury herself in the green soup again, letting the soup cover her mouth and only exposing her nostrils. Bastard master, you're too hateful. You actually threw such a lovely Alice to this old witch and let her do whatever she wants. Just you wait. When I escape from the evil claws of this old witch, I will work very hard to curse you. At this moment, Alice had long since thought it through. Last time when Grimm said that he wanted to protect her so righteously, it must have been an illusion. Although her destiny talent was very important to him, it was not important to the point where he would throw away his life. So, last time when he asked to cover her escape, he must have other intentions. Yes, that must be it. He must have seen through the deep meaning behind this old witch's strange actions and put on a good show. This old witch thought that she was in control of the situation, but she did not expect to be deceived by a new little sorcerer. She really is old and muddled. So, do I need to expose the hypocritical master's intentions to this old witch? No, not yet. The old witch had already promised to release her in 10 days, and she had endured for 7 days. She would regain her freedom in 3 days. If something unexpected happened at this time, she might also get into trouble. When she thought that she might be trapped in this dark place forever, enduring this crazy old witch's inexplicable experiments on her body, Alice felt that she was about to break down. She felt that she was about to break down. I curse you. No, dear master, if you will only get Alice out of here, Alice will never be so mischievous again. For the first time, Alice threw away her pride, threw away her arrogance, and began to sincerely pray to the awesome fate. Chapter 292. Outer Ring, Byron family's encampment. In a small secret room, far away from the banquet hall, the goblin cabbie was fiddling with something with a fervent expression. In front of him, a simple magical machine propped up a white screen. The self-proclaimed great inventor, engineer, and planar merchant of the Goblin Empire, Duke Gaz was wearing a high magnification monocle, his saliva flying everywhere as he roared. No, absolutely not. Gazlu waved his green arm that was covered in thick hair. Anything less than 17 magic crystals is out of the question. I won't let a vampire like you take advantage of me. We've known each other for so long, but you've never obtained anything of value. You can't be a qualified planar merchant like this. You're only fit to be a depraved goblin who picks through rubbish. The other party's sarcasm had evidently provoked the goblin cabbie. Any words that insulted his dream of being a planar merchant would incur his wrath. You coward who only knows how to hide behind screen. The teleportation device you gave me is a piece of junk. It can only teleport items that weigh less than 500 grams, and there will definitely be a teleportation error every 3 to 4 times. Who the hell knows which corner of the multiverse this broken machine of yours has randomly thrown the treasures I've teleported to? Do I have to bear the losses caused by your device? Bastard, you uncultured goblin. You don't understand how terrifying the energy required to teleport between 2 different planes is. You don't have an energy furnace, you don't have a reaction pool, you don't have an energy room. A lowly goblin like you doesn't have anything. You want to rely on some low-grade energy crystals to obtain a large and stable spatial passageway. Not to mention the fact that the Goblin Empire doesn't have such technology. Even the Magi behind you can't do this. Then what should I do? You're always making a ruckus, using an unreliable teleportation device to start trading. Who's going to bear the losses caused? If you can get me some useful Magi items or special energy treasures, I can bear the losses caused by spatial destruction and spatial turbulence. Don't think that I'm easy to fool just because I don't know anything. This device of yours is too unreliable. It's not suitable for large-scale transactions between planes. All transactions are basically one-off. Once you get the sample and analyze it successfully, you won't need to continue the transaction. I've spent so much effort to gather resources for you, but I've only gotten so little in return. I won't do such a stupid thing again. Ugh. On the light screen, Gazlurvi pushed up his spectacles and sized up the little goblin in front of him. Who would have thought that a little gnome who lived under the thrall of a terrifying wizard and had no knowledge of science and technology would be able to understand such complicated logic? He couldn't help but look at Cabby in a new light. All right, little Kirby. Since we both need the things in each other's hands, we should show some sincerity. I can raise the price appropriately, and you have to take out something really useful. Guzruvi's wrinkled green face was full of sincerity. Is my existence valuable to you and the goblins? Cabby asked doubtfully. Of course. Gazlurvi pushed up his spectacles again. You have to know that you're now in the Magus world, a large plane famous in the multiverse. It's many times larger than the plane our Goblin Empire is in. If I accidentally throw the teleportation device into spatial turbulence, it can drift through space and appear in any corner of the multiverse. If you want me to open up a new path to the Magus world, the Goblin Empire can't do it with its strength, and it won't be able to do it. After all, the legends say that Magi are very terrifying and invasive creatures. You mean to say that we can only rely on this broken device to transact? Yes. Is there anything I need to pay attention to when using this teleportation device? Firstly, for the teleportation device to work stably, it's best if you can find a powerful energy source for it. Such as an energy pool. Do you think a little gnome like me can come into contact with an energy pool in a Magus tower? Next, a natural elemental gathering place, such as the core of a large storm, an underground volcano. Do you have any sincerity? With my strength, wouldn't I just be courting death if I went to those places? Or some high-grade energy crystals, at least 10 times more powerful than the magic crystals you're using now. Only then will the teleportation device be able to work stably. High-grade energy crystals? What's that? Can you be more specific? Cabby muttered as he rummaged through his waist pouch in frustration. Later, he felt that it was too troublesome to rummage through, so he simply poured out all the things in his waist pouch, letting them cover the entire table. Wait. Gaz Lurvy's urgent voice suddenly came from the light screen. What is that silver-white metal object? Cabby followed Gaz Lurvy's instructions and took out a heavy metal ball from the messy pile of items. This was a metal ball that looked like it was carved out of silver, but it did not have the softness of silver when touched. The surface of the ball was uneven, and there were strange patterns and grooves everywhere. Although he could not sense any energy aura from it, it was still a genuine mechanical heart. Mechanical heart was an alchemical heart created by a puppet master for a high-grade magic puppet or golem. It was the core component of a witchcraft puppet. It could be said that the reason a puppet knight could have such powerful combat power was not only because of the hard shells of countless rare resources, but also because of the existence of the mechanical heart, which could bring this cold, hard metal creature to life. When the puppet master Runo fused the soul of a grade 2 knight into it, the mechanical heart's ability grew by leaps and bounds. As long as it was given a complete metal body, it could bring it back to life and become a powerful metal puppet. Of course, such a powerful mechanical heart did not belong to the goblin Cabby. It was a spoil of war obtained by its owner Grim. After thoroughly analyzing its secrets, Grim thought about whether he should keep this mechanical heart and create an indestructible iron guard for himself. Unfortunately, he could not find any information about the puppet amulet. Without the puppet amulet, it meant that if he really wanted to create a giant iron guard, Grim could only be like those low-grade arcane sorcerers, running around the world with an indomitable iron lump. Magic puppets were quite powerful, but the fact that they were not easy to carry around was enough to sentence them to death. In the future, when Grim had his own base or wizard tower, it would be a good idea to leave this thing at home to guard the door. But now, it was better to bring a few high-grade magic puppets with him. Therefore, Grim, who planned to exchange it for some high-grade elemental crystal cores, threw it to Cabby. Cabby was determined to become a goblin merchant anyway, so it was suitable for him to do this kind of thing. At this moment, Cabby held the mechanical heart in his hand and looked at the light screen doubtfully. This mechanical heart is useful to you. Of course it's useful. If I'm not wrong, it should be a magical mechanical control core obtained by sorcerers through witchcraft. It's the kind with super high intelligence. Our Goblin Empire walks the path of magical machinery. Although we can create a similar magical mechanical core, we have never found a way to integrate life and souls into it. So it can be sold for a high price. Cabby smiled sinisterly as he lightly tossed the metal ball in the air. Gaz Lurvy was silent. Tell me, be straightforward. How much are you willing to pay for this mechanical heart? Don't try to deceive me with those inferior things like rocket boots and parachutes. Also, this mechanical heart is seriously overloaded. Are you sure it can be sent through your teleportation device? After a long silence, Gaz Lurvy seemed to have finally understood, and a flattering smile appeared on his greasy green face. Dear Cabby, I hereby solemnly recommend to you the greatest war machine of the Goblin Empire, the magical mechanical armor. With it, you will no longer have to fear your enemies. It will become your most loyal and powerful warrior, destroying all enemies that appear in its line of sight. Oh, you mean those terrifying metal men that are as large as hills? I'm not going to set up a construction team. You're giving me this variant of the logging robot, but what can I do with it? I'm afraid that just gathering the metal and spare parts required to build it will take me over 100 years. Does that mean anything to me? Cabby's intelligence was clearly off the charts today, and he was no longer the little goblin that could be easily deceived in the past. He roared angrily at the screen. Don't be angry, dear Cabby. Then let me recommend you a super terrifying offensive weapon, the magical cannon. With it, you will be invincible. No enemy will be able to defend against its terrifying attack. No way, no way. I'm a peace-loving goblin merchant. You should sell those fighting and killing things to others. I only need some high-grade elemental crystal cores. These are things that Master personally ordered us to collect, and the more the better. All right. Elemental crystal cores it is. How much do you intend to pay for the trade? the manufacturing method of the magical reaver, and the finished product of the demonic cannon, along with 100 grade 2 elemental crystal cores and above. Bullshit. Gazruvi immediately jumped 3 feet high. Why don't you just rob someone? Your mechanical heart isn't worth that price. Then how much can you offer? Gazruvi immediately extended 3 fingers, but after some hesitation, he gritted his teeth and extended 4. For grade 2 elemental crystal cores, that's all I can get. Bullshit. It was now Cabby's turn to jump 3 feet high. This is robbery. This is outright robbery. You're the greediest, most shameless, and stingiest goblin I've ever seen. This price is robbery. The 2 goblins of the same race were obviously stingy and wretched to the core, but they were also greedy and shameless. Hence, separated by a dense screen, the 2 would point at the sky and curse at each other from time to time. But after a while, the 2 would gather together and start haggling. Chapter 293. Sky City, Inner Ring Main Control Hall. This was a huge palace built in the middle of the mountain, covering an area of nearly 10,000 square meters. However, such a description was not accurate. To be precise, it should be that this huge and magnificent mysterious palace was built first. In order to conceal its existence, the Silver Alliance put on a layer of mountain shell. Most of the buildings in the inner ring were added later, and the purpose of their existence was to study and protect the mysterious palace in the middle of the mountain. If one had the opportunity to become a sorcerer of the Silver Alliance, put on a silver robe, and gloriously become a member of the ruling parliament, then one would be qualified to step into this mysterious palace, study, and understand the ultimate secret of the arcane sorcerers. Stepping into this place, one would be surprised to find that it was simply a sea of runic machinery. There was a huge space inside the mysterious palace, and in this space, there were trillions of gears, shafts, springs, levers, and other indescribable metal parts and components floating. They were of different sizes, more or less, and their shapes and forms were not exactly the same. The only thing they had in common was that every part and component was silver white, and they were all engraved with a strange golden rune. These metal parts, the big ones were as big as an island, and the small ones could only be seen with the help of the highest magnifying glass. They seemed to be floating in the void in a messy and disorderly manner. But if someone could take a panoramic view of the entire mysterious space, they would be surprised to find that everything had a pattern. In the entire mysterious space, the trillions of runic machinery were completely operating according to some powerful rule power. Mechanical parts and metal components of different sizes were randomly floating inside. Once 2 different parts collided together, they would randomly assemble into a new part. Once the number of parts increased, a strange runic rune would appear in the mysterious space. No one could understand what this rune was. Perhaps it was a part of a clock mechanism, or perhaps it was a part of a powerful runic puppet, or perhaps it was just a bunch of meaningless gears. Of course, it was even more possible that it was the prototype of a mysterious machine that no one had ever seen before. Unfortunately, such a composite mechanical structure could not exist for too long. Very quickly, the runic machinery that had just been pieced together would once again split into countless basic components in a new collision. But the strange thing was that these newly disassembled parts were obviously different from the parts before they were assembled. Thus, trillions of silver parts floated in the void of the mysterious palace, assembling and disintegrating repeatedly. But no matter how they reorganized and decomposed, they were always confined to that empty space and would not flow out. It was as if there was a transparent boundary there. This was the core of the Sky Castle, the mechanical realm. Today was still the most ordinary day in the mechanical secret realm. A dozen magi in silver robes with silver badges on their chests shuttled through the sea of rune machines under the protection of a silver glow. They were all members of the Silver Alliance's parliament, and possessed extremely high status and authority that others envied. But here, they were just a group of diligent gardeners and porters. In this mysterious space, Any life form that did not have the protection of an esoteric amulet would find it hard to survive. They would either be crushed into meat paste by the densely packed gears and bearings, or be vaporized by the sudden disintegration of the runic machinery's energy storm. The entire Sky City was like a huge energy concentrator. Every day, a large amount of magic energy would be gathered and poured into this mysterious space, providing it with an endless supply of powerful energy. What this mysterious space gave them in return were powerful runic machines that possessed great power. Every day, a few silver-robed magi would enter the mysterious space and unfold a runic puppet scroll that was the result of countless arcane magi's painstaking efforts. Amidst the endless sea of runic machines, there were layers upon layers. When the silver light engulfed the surroundings, countless gears, bearings, grinding wheels, transmission rods, springs, pipes, and many other strange parts that could not be named floated above the scroll like bees attracted by the fragrance of flowers. They began to assemble themselves according to the power of laws engraved in the scroll. There was no need for any external intervention at all. With just a puppet scroll that had perfect laws and a self-consistent system, an exquisitely designed and powerful silver runic puppet was automatically assembled. Under the control of the power of laws, the moment the silver runic puppet was completed, it possessed extremely high battle intelligence. It began to demonstrate various difficult battle moves according to the runic spell formation that was etched in its body. If there was no conflict between the power of laws and the puppet scroll, the silver runic puppet could be maintained indefinitely. However, if there was even the slightest conflict between laws, the silver runic puppet would suddenly disintegrate during operation and then revert back to its original parts and components. The silver-robed magi were responsible for recording the entire process of the silver runic puppet's assembly to its disintegration, so that the arcane magi could continue to correct and improve the mistakes in the scroll. Relying on this method, the arcane magi could continuously try and make mistakes and continuously improve until the silver runic puppet's combat power met their requirements. Only then would it be finalized. This way, they could directly deliver the final model to the puppet factory for mass production, thus avoiding the large amount of waste and long trial and error processes in the early stages of puppet development. Of course, although they had the assistance of the mechanical secret realm, which allowed them to save a lot of resources and time, how could a mature and powerful runic puppet design be so easily completed? There were tens of thousands of arcane magi in Sky City, but less than a tenth of them had the qualifications to wear a silver robe, and only 1,000th of them had the qualifications to become a member of the council. In the end, there were less than 10 who could come into contact with the mechanical secret realm and list it as a research project. And all of them had the title of council elder. In the whole of Sky City, and even the whole area ruled by the Silver Alliance, they had great power and influence. Therefore, according to the different levels of authority within the Silver Alliance, some people divided the Alliance members into 5 ranks. The lowest rank was, of course, the ordinary silver-robed magi who had the status of arcane magi, rank 1. They were the foundation of the Silver Alliance, and also had some privileges in Sky City. Above the silver-robed magi were the silver-robed enforcers, rank 2. They were slightly more powerful arcane magi, and were mainly responsible for the normal operation and security of Sky City. They had the authority to mobilize part of the Sky Guards. The silver-robed enforcers' headquarters was located in the bird's nest above Sky City, which was also the station of the Sky Guards. If ordinary silver-robed magi were like commoners, then the silver-robed enforcers were like police officers. The Sky Guards were a legion of runic puppets controlled by the silver-robed enforcers. Above the silver-robed enforcers were the silver-robed counselors, rank 3. They were usually taken up by arcane masters, and were also the core members who controlled and promoted the development of the Silver Alliance. Most of the Silver Alliance's daily affairs were decided and executed by them, and their main place of activity was the Alliance's council hall in the central area. Above the silver-robed counselors were the chairman of the council and the elders, rank 4. Currently, the Silver Alliance had a chairman and a deputy chairman, as well as 7 elders. These 9 people were the core combat power of the entire Silver Alliance, and were also the guarantee of the Silver Alliance's strength as one of the 3 major sorcerer organizations in the Sorcerer Continent. It was precisely because of their existence that the Silver Alliance could continue for tens of thousands of years without declining. At any time, the Silver Alliance would always have at least 9 rank 4 arcane magi. Even if they died due to factors such as the end of their lifespan or accidental deaths, they would find ways to replenish the number of members in a short period of time. Therefore, the 9 rank 4 magi would always be the Silver Alliance's top combat power on the surface. As for whether they were hiding part of their strength in private, it was always a mystery to outsiders. Due to being buried in the witchcraft laboratory all year round, the arcane magi usually came into contact with powerful and loyal witchcraft puppets. Therefore, they developed the habit of worshipping rules and order. Therefore, when sorcerers from the outside came to Sky City, they mostly evaluated the Silver Alliance as dreamy, powerful, and inflexible. Since the Silver Alliance had gathered nearly 60 to 70% of the arcane magi in the Sorcerer Continent, Sky City had become a large stage where all kinds of witchcraft puppets gathered. Up until now, the Silver Alliance had amassed a large number of powerful witchcraft puppets. This had become the thing that sorcerers from all regions of the Sorcerer Continent were most curious about. Although the Silver Alliance sold quite a number of witchcraft puppets every year to supply the various sorcerer families in their expeditions, they kept even more. No one knew how many witchcraft puppets the Silver Alliance had secretly hidden, but everyone knew that it was definitely an extremely large number. However, at this moment, an abnormal alarm suddenly sounded in a space management committee under the silver-robed enforcers' headquarters in the central area of Sky City. Warning, warning. Abnormal spatial fluctuations detected. Initial determination is that it's a small alien wormhole. Target area being locked. Target area has been locked. The source of the spatial fluctuations is at 167 Champs-Élysées Street in the 12th district of the Outer Circle. Verified to belong to the Byron Magus family in the Terran Dagon area. Chapter 294. Someone had woken Grim up from his sleep. The sound of someone banging on the door could be heard clearly, and even a simple defensive spell could not completely block it. When he removed the barrier and opened the door, he was immediately shocked by the scene outside. The area where the Byron family resided in had shops on the side facing the street, while the inner side had become the family's encampment and warehouse. However, at this moment, the sky above the family's encampment was covered by a huge black shadow. An airship that resembled a giant whale was hovering above the Byron family's encampment, and tall figures leapt down from it with whistling sounds. Their heavy bodies smashed deep holes into the stone slabs on the ground. Then, amidst the grinding sounds of mechanical gears, 4-meter-tall ferocious metal puppets crawled out of the deep holes, the magic gems embedded in their metal eye sockets emitting a dazzling and terrifying red light. Among them, there were humanoid metal puppets, spider-shaped metal puppets, and some huge round constructs that could float near the ground, with more than a dozen strange metal tentacles coming out of them. Sky Guard Squad 935 has been ordered to take over this area. No one is allowed to enter or leave as they please. Stay where you are and wait for the silver-robed enforcers to investigate. Anyone who disobeys will be killed immediately. The metal puppets shouted in their unique mechanical voice as they moved quickly blocking all the entrances and important areas of the Byron family's encampment. When the 29 rank 1 metal puppets had occupied all the advantageous terrain, an even more ferocious and terrifying war golem descended on a floating disc. This was a terrifying war golem that was 10 meters tall. It had a humanoid body, and its torso was densely covered in colorful patterns. Every movement it made had a suffocating and terrifying aura. In its hand was a huge and exaggerated metal battle axe. The huge axe is surface enough to be used as a gate to any city. The war golem wielded the huge battle axe, every step it took causing the ground to shake. If such a huge thing went crazy, It would probably take less than a quarter of an hour to destroy the entire encampment. As a top-notch magus of the Byron family station in Sky City, Magus Nunnally had already appeared at the scene of the incident. Unfortunately, her identity as a rank 2 magus was not enough to scare anyone here. The indomitable war golem had the terrifying strength of no less than grade 2. Considering that this was the headquarters of the Silver Alliance, the war golems and construction puppets belonging to the Sky Guards would receive a great deal of support from spells within the vicinity of Sky City. Therefore, if they were to fight, it would not be easy for a Tier 2 elemental sorcerer to defeat this big fellow of the same rank. Moreover, if someone dared to attack the Sky Guards, it would be like poking a giant hornet's nest. In less than a quarter of an hour, the densely packed fortresses in the sky would descend. At that time, this small family base would be engulfed by a tide of terrifying magic marionettes. Therefore, Nunnally floated in front of the giant war golem and loudly protested against its reckless intrusion, but she didn't dare to take the initiative to chase them away. Please wait patiently. A silver-robe enforcer will come and explain the situation to you soon. Until then, please ask your men to stop all suspicious activities. In response to the Tier 2 sorcerer's protest, the war golem threw out a sentence and ignored him. The bionic ruby compound eyes inlaid on its head shot out concentrated red rays, scanning everything in the encampment in detail without missing a single detail. However, when the war golem turned its head in a certain direction, the ruby compound eyes that flickered rhythmically seemed to have discovered some signs and flickered even more frequently. The wide range of red rays from before quickly concentrated on a room next to Grimm's. Grimm stood at the door of his residence. When he saw the war golem's detection rays focused on Cabby's room, his heart immediately turned upside down. This damn Cabby, what was it up to this time? Even the famous Sky Guards have been provoked. Don't blame me for not stopping you if you're courting death. Grimm cursed inwardly as he silently used the slave contract between him and Cabby to call out to him. Since they were very close to each other and Cabby's room was not isolated by a defensive spell, Grimm could easily contact him. Damn goblin, what have you done this time? Don't you know that you've provoked the guards of Sky Castle? Tell me, what have you done? Grimm cursed impatiently as soon as the two's minds connected. Master, Cabby shivered as he replied, I used that mechanical heart to exchange for some good stuff with a fellow from the Goblin Empire in another plane. I was just about to report my ass. Don't be so happy yet. Think about how to get rid of the Sky Guards who have come to our door first. Grimm reprimanded. By the way, how did you keep in contact with each other? Master, it's like this. At this point, Cabby didn't dare to hide anything anymore. He told him everything about the connection between him and Gaz Lurvy. After listening to his description, Grimm immediately fell into deep thought. What should I do? Hand Cabby over? If he handed Cabby over, then the connection between him and the Goblin Empire would end. If any large organization obtained that teleportation device, they would be able to make a big deal out of it. A goblin plane? That meant a secondary plane that could be taken away at will. Endless metal mines. A large number of qualified slaves who were adept at manufacturing machines, countless unknown resources. Any one of these was enough for a Magus family to rise to power. It would be a pity if he let it slip from his hands like this. However, if he did not hand over Cabby and the teleportation device, how was he going to explain the teleportation just now? Grimm's thoughts raced, and he quickly made up his mind. At this moment, the space above the encampment trembled slightly. A stable teleportation door slowly opened, and 3 silver-robed enforcers walked out with their heads held high. Lady Nunnally, very good. With you here, today's matter will definitely be resolved perfectly. The leading silver-robed enforcer wore a silver metal headband on his forehead. It was densely engraved with hollowed-out runes, and he was obviously acquainted with Magus Nunnally. The 3 silver-robe enforcers were all grade 1 magi. Logically speaking, in the Magus world where strength was everything, they could only hide in a corner and deal with Nunnally, who had the strength of a Grade 2 Magus. However, here in the Silver Alliance's territory, even a Tier 2 Magus like Nunnally couldn't act as haughtily as before. On the contrary, she had to negotiate politely with these uninvited guests on equal footing. "So, good Sir Randolph, may I know why you've come to my family's encampment?" Magus Nunnally was a familiar face who had hung around in Sky City for many years, and her strength was obvious. Without sufficient reason, these Silver Robe enforcers were not willing to offend a Grade 2 Magus for no reason. "Lady Nunnally, you might not know, but we've just detected the appearance of a wormhole in your family's encampment." "So?" Randolph explained with a smile that did not reach his eyes. "What did you say? Is it a spatial teleportation or a wormhole?" Nunnally frowned, as if she could not believe her ears. If it was a spatial teleportation, it meant that there was a small teleportation spell formation hidden in the encampment, used for long-distance teleportation within a plane. This was forbidden by the Sky Council. However, if it was a wormhole, it meant that someone had broken through the Magus World barrier and was trying to connect to another plane. Although many Magus families were doing this, they would place the communication point in their own family's Magus Tower in order to prevent outsiders from detecting the spatial anomaly. Who would be foolish enough to go to Sky City to connect to another plane? Although the Magus World did not fear the invasion of another plane, doing this in the heart of the Silver Alliance was still a little too rash. Just as Nunnally was confused, Grimm shouted awkwardly, "Lady Nunnally, this might be a misunderstanding." Everyone's gaze immediately focused on Grimm. Misunderstanding? What kind of misunderstanding? Randolph narrowed his eyes and could not help but sneer. "Lady Nunnally, this person looks unfamiliar. Is he also a new Magus in your family?" It had to be said that Grimm's strength was still too shallow. Anyone could tell that he was a new Magus, and he would not be valued by others. He was invited by our family from the Scattered Towers to participate in the arcane competition. His name is Grimm, and he has a powerful elemental puppet under him. Wizard Nunnally explained briefly, and could not help but lower her head and frown. "Grimm, what do you mean by misunderstanding? If you are here because of the spatial anomaly just now, then I must admit that it was caused by me. Then I have to admit that I caused it." Grimm's reply was resolute and decisive. "A new Magus like you can open a wormhole and connect to another plane?" "Huh!" Randolph raised his head and was about to laugh out loud to mock Grimm. But when he saw something Grimm took out from his pocket, he suddenly froze and could not help but blurt out. Chapter 295. What was the Void Stone? Most wizards might not even get to see the Void Stone's true appearance in their entire lives. When the relevant books introduced the Void Stone, they simply described it as the core material for building a long-distance teleportation formation. This description was not wrong, but it was not accurate. Even without the Void Stone, it was possible to build a long-distance teleportation formation, but it would require a wizard tower to be the space-time beacon for the teleportation, and every teleportation would consume a large amount of magical crystals. This meant a large amount of money and resources, as well as a long construction period. If the construction of a long-distance teleportation formation was used in peacetime, this speed and expenditure could be considered acceptable. But if it was used in a dimensional war where every second mattered, this speed was too slow. In a bloody and cruel dimensional war, the earlier the teleportation formation was built, the more troops that could be sent over, the greater the possibility of changing the outcome of the dimensional war. If the speed of the teleportation was too slow, the stronghold built by the wizards in the early stages would be swallowed up by the local aborigines with their advantage in numbers, and all the previous investments would be for naught. What was more terrifying was that the wizards used by the family for battles would be lost in other dimensions. This was a huge blow that no wizard family could bear. Take the Salubo family, for example. They had clearly won a dimensional war, but because they had lost too many wizards in the dimensional war, they were close to the lowest limit of the family's ability to maintain control over the various dimensions. That was why the family's power in the main plane was in turmoil. To put it bluntly, If not for the timely return of the main forces of the family like Corgan and Grimm, the Salubo family might have lost 30% of their power in the Wizard Continent before they could regain their footing. Even though these losses could be regained as the family thrived in the future, it was inevitable that they would be fatigued in the short term. At the start of the Dimensional War, if the Salubo family had the Void Stone, they would not have needed to build the War Wizard Tower with so many people. They could find a desolate mountain and use the Void Stone to build a long-distance teleportation formation. That way, a large number of people and resources could be continuously transported into other dimensions. By the time the natives of the other dimensions realized that something was wrong and gathered a large army to rush over, they would no longer be facing a few magi. Instead, they would be facing an organized army of wizard beasts and a wizard battle squad that was ready for battle. Moreover, the long-distance teleportation arrays built with void stones could automatically absorb the spatial power in the void, thereby reducing the need for mana crystals. This way, the sorcerer families could save a lot of money. However, it was precisely because of the excellent quality of the Void Stone that it had become a strategic resource that sorcerer families with ambitions to conquer planes had to hoard. The appearance of any Void Stone would cause many sorcerer families to fight for it openly and covertly, so it rarely appeared in the circulation of various regions. Basically, as soon as they showed themselves, they would be snatched away by large families or organizations. Ordinary small families and sorcerers would not even have a chance to see them. Therefore, when the silver-robed enforcer Randolph blurted out the words Void Stone, the Byron family wizards gathered in the encampment couldn't help but tremble. They all looked at the fist-sized gray stone in Grimm's hand. This is the Void Stone. It's too inconspicuous. While everyone was still in shock, Grimm's right hand that was holding the gray stone shook slightly. Strange silver lines appeared on the trajectory of the gray stone, and the space around the gray stone began to slightly distort. All the sorcerers were shocked. Without the help of any spell, it could easily distort the void with its own characteristics. As expected of the famous Void Stone, after the initial shock, all the sorcerers' eyes were filled with greed and pity. Good stuff, it really is good stuff. Too bad it was shown in front of everyone. If only I knew about this, wouldn't it be? One female and two male silver-robe enforcers looked at each other and immediately made a decision. Wizard Randolph stepped up and yelled, "Mr. Grimm, since you've conducted an extremely dangerous space experiment in the Sky City without permission, I, representing the Space Committee, have decided to seal up your space experiment equipment for now. You can go to the Space Committee in 3 days to appeal, and the Union Parliament will make a fair decision. Now, you can hand over your experiment equipment." Wait a minute, a voice suddenly interrupted Randolph's speech. Everyone looked towards the source of the voice. It was the red-robed Magus Nunnally. "Mr. Randolph, you have conducted dangerous experiments in Sky City without permission, and you need to be punished. However, if I remember correctly, as long as this experiment does not endanger the safety of Sky City and its members, you could be punished by paying a fine. Since Mr. Grimm is an important guest of our family, the Byron family is willing to pay for his fine." Randolph was so angry that his eyes widened. As a fair enforcer of Sky City, of course, he knew that Ms. Nunnally's rules were valid. If it was in the past, he would naturally be willing to do a favor for the sake of a Tier 2 sorcerer and make the matter small. But this involved a Void Stone. Looking at its size, it had far exceeded the standard amount needed to build an interplane teleportation circle. If he let something like this pass in front of him, he would probably be blamed by all the Union Parliament members when he returned. "Ms. Nunnally, what you said is the normal way to deal with this. What he's doing is extremely dangerous space experiments, so we can't use this method to replace it." Wizard Randolph explained in a serious tone. His voice was deep and full of power, showing his determination. Unfortunately, faced with a Void Stone that could bring great benefits to her family, Wizard Nunnally was obviously not willing to give it up easily. Of course, it was unwise to offend these silver-robed enforcers for no reason in Sky City, but if the price was a Void Stone, then it was not a bad idea. As long as the family behaved a little better in Sky City in the future, these guys who only followed the rules and laws would not be able to take away the Byron family's rights. Things were very clear in front of them. Once this void stone fell into their hands, no one would believe such a ridiculous thing, even if they repeatedly said that they could get it back by appealing to the Union Parliament. These guys with their rigid minds were not very good at fighting, but their ability to flip through the laws and use the Sky Code word by word was top-notch. Who knew what kind of laws they would find in that thick 3 meters tall Sky Code to swallow this void stone? Of course, forcefully taking it away would not happen. Those Union Parliament members would definitely redeem this void stone with a very attractive price. However, what kind of price could compare to a secondary plane that could be easily obtained? Seriously speaking, almost every old sorcerer family in the Sorcerer Continent would have a waymark that had yet to be conquered in their hands. The main reason why they had not conquered them yet was that the cost of resources and manpower to open up a plane war was too high. Every established Magus family needed a period of time to accumulate resources. Once their reserves reached the minimum required for a planar war, the family's magi would also have new blood. That was the best time to consider launching a planar expedition. The only reason why they did not dare to eat delicious food was because they were afraid of choking to death. However, if they had a void stone, they could sneak in and build a teleportation formation. Before the natives of the plane could react, a large number of family wizards and organized wizard guards would be able to enter the plane. With the terrifying methods of the wizards, would the secondary plane still have a chance to resist? He only needed to build a teleportation formation and a complete war wizard tower. The difference in difficulty would determine the outcome of a dimensional war. Therefore, in a situation where the silver-robed enforcer didn't have a hold on the family, it was necessary for Wizard Nunnally to fight for the Void Stone. This treasure was too important to her family. She had no choice but to fight for it. As the law enforcers of the Sky City, even though Randolph and the others were usually domineering, they could not forcefully take it away. Seeing that even the Sky Guards could not make Wizard Nunnally yield, Randolph had no choice but to announce that he would bring Grimm to the Union Parliament. It looked like the Union Parliament members would have to make a fair judgment on this matter. The Union Parliament was the highest authority in the Sky City. It had 97 Level 3 members. Most of them were high-level arcane wizards trained by the Silver Alliance themselves. However, they also hired some well-known Level 3 wizards who were not from the Silver Alliance. The Union Parliament Hall was the most important magic building in the entire Central Circle. The Silver Alliance ruled over a large area. All the human settlements in the southwest of the Wizard Continent were under its protection. There were a total of 15 regions and countries. The Silver Alliance had to send members to manage each region. To facilitate communication and trade, the Silver Alliance had stationed members in the scattered forest of towers, the Northern Witches, the Wizard Association, and other large regions. Hence, even though 97 Tier 3 counselors sounded like a lot, it was clearly not enough to make ends meet. Chapter 296. Your name is Grimm, and you're from the Cerubo family of the scattered Terran region? A rat-headed counselor raised his head from the tall judge's stand. He adjusted the gold-rimmed spectacles on his nose and looked at Grimm doubtfully. Yes, my lord. Grimm tried his best to reply calmly. Otherwise, if anyone were to see a person who resembled a large rat wearing a silver robe, a flat hat, and a pair of gold-rimmed spectacles leisurely flipping through documents, their first reaction would be to throw their heads back and laugh out loud. However, Grimm did not dare. He really did not dare. Although Grimm's appearance was laughable, he was still a grade 3 magus. After all, Grimm was a criminal waiting to be judged, and any disrespectful behavior would bring him unpredictable punishment. While you were in Sky City, you violated the spatial regulations here. You did not apply in advance and opened a small spatial wormhole without permission. This action would pose a certain degree of threat to the safety of Sky City. Do you admit to this? Ratman Councilman Pyro slowly read through the documents handed to him by the silver-robed enforcer Randolph, repeating Grimm's crimes word by word. My lord, I do not deny that I violated the regulations and conducted spatial experiments without permission. However, I do not agree with the accusation that the spatial experiments will affect the safety of Sky City. Grimm had the urge to laugh out loud as he faced the court of justice in this foreign world. However, this matter was related to his personal interests, so he could only endure it and deal with the other party with reason and evidence. Do you have anything to add to Sir Grimm's answer? Pyro asked the silver-robed Enforcer Randolph. My lord, the Spatial Committee acts according to the rules of Sky City. The defensive mechanism of Sky City has detected the spatial wormhole and estimated the intensity of the wormhole to be XXX Dar. The wormhole has a radius of 1 meter, and it connects to a low-magic secondary material plane. The location of the connection is between Star Sector 0713 and Star Sector 0941. Since it's an unknown, distant region, rashly connecting to it will cause Sky City to face the possibility of contamination. That's why the three of us agreed that His Excellency Grimm should be severely punished for his recklessness. The silver-robed Enforcer Randolph's reply was sonorous and forceful, but Grimm rolled his eyes. You can already detect that the opposite side of the wormhole is a low-magic secondary plane, and you're still worried about it invading the sorcerer's world? This was simply sophistry. However, in order to not expose Cabby's teleportation device, Grimm could only shake his head and play along with Randolph's act. Sir, I think Mr. Randolph's conclusion is too arbitrary, and he doesn't have any direct evidence to support his conclusion. Grimm still wanted to defend himself, but the Ratman Councilman Pyro interrupted him by knocking the wooden hammer. Sir, I think Mr. Randolph's conclusion is too arbitrary. Your Excellency Nunnally, we're discussing Grimm's mistake of opening a wormhole without permission. Why are you here? Ratfolk Councilman Pyro turned his head to look at Nunnally. Sir, this Sir Grimm is a guest invited by the Byron family. He has just won an arcane competition for us. As he came in a hurry, we didn't have the time to explain the rules here to him, and that's why he made such a mistake. I hope the Alliance Council can take this into consideration and punish him leniently. The Byron family is willing to pay for his punishment. Nunnally obviously did not want to give up on the Void Stone so easily, but it's a Void Stone. Although the rat folk, Councilman Pyro, looked like an old pedant, he was not a stubborn old man. At this moment, he directly pointed out the crux of the problem with a smile on his face. Since Sir Grimm has made a mistake, the only way for the Silver Alliance to let it go is to hand over the Void Stone. Of course, we won't take it for free. We'll buy it at a price that both parties can accept. As for you, Nunnally, don't even think about getting involved. I can use my authority to give you 2% of the Byron family's resources from my personal share as compensation. What do you think? The Ratfolk Councilman Pyro smiled and stopped Nunnally's unrealistic thoughts. Nunnally hesitated for a moment, but in the face of such a powerful councilman, he could only accept it helplessly. As for Grimm's opinion, to be honest, it was no longer important at this time. The only thing he could do was to make his request and do his best to minimize his losses. Say it, kid. The Ratfolk Councilman Pyro was obviously quite satisfied with this unexpected gain, and his mood became much better. What do you want in return? The loss of the Void Stone was within Grimm's expectations, so he pretended to be in great pain on the surface, but his heart was racing. Sir, I'm also quite interested in voodoo puppets. I came to Sky City this time to collect some knowledge related to voodoo puppets, as well as some resources to manufacture puppets. Also, I've always been interested in puppet amulets. Grimm softly stated his conditions as he stared at the Ratfolk, Councilman Pyro's expression. Bargaining completely depended on the bottom line of both parties. If he asked for too little, he would be letting down his Void Stone, and if he asked for too much, he might incur the Ratfolk, Councilman Pyro's displeasure. Hence, when Grimm mentioned the puppet amulets, he saw the Ratfolk, Councilman Pyro's sharp, furry face tremble, and he knew that he should not raise the price. Voodoo puppet knowledge, resources, and puppet amulets. The Ratfolk Councilman Pyro frowned and pondered for a moment before reluctantly nodding in agreement. I can't give you the advanced knowledge of the Alliance, but universal voodoo puppets are not a problem. As for resources, I can allocate a batch of resources from the warehouse, enough for you to manufacture 20 standard voodoo puppets. You can choose any type you want. Puppet amulets. That's the most difficult thing to obtain. The Alliance's rules forbid the sale of such strategic treasures to non-members. However, I do have a simple product that isn't restricted by the Alliance's rules. I can give it to you. Now, let's see if the Void Stone in your hand is worth these things. The ratfolk, Councilman Pyro, slowly stated the price he could afford. However, his eyes immediately lit up as he stared at the gray Void Stone in Grimm's hand. That size, that quality. The ratfolk, Councilman Pyro's thin face twitched slightly. He quickly grabbed the Void Stone and sent a few puffs of black smoke into it, silently inspecting the detailed data inside. After a while, a look of surprise finally appeared on his face. It seemed that the quality of this Void Stone was far higher than his estimation. Randolph, take him to my wizard tower and give him all the knowledge and resources. Just follow the standards I mentioned just now, and let him choose any he wants. Also, kid, this is for you. As the ratfolk, Councilman Pyro spoke, a pin-like crystal amulet was thrown into Grimm's arms. Puppet amulet. This was the puppet amulet. Grimm suppressed his excitement and put away the puppet amulet. After bowing to the ratfolk, Councilman Pyro again, he left the small courtroom with Randolph. It was obvious that Randolph and the ratfolk, Councilman Pyro, had some special relationship. Otherwise, Randolph would not have brought Grimm to him. There were no less than 12 small courtrooms surrounding the Circular Alliance Parliament Hall, and there were even 5 grade 3 councilmen stationed in them. Yet, Randolph had brought Grimm to the ratfolk, Councilman Pyro's place. Grimm would not believe that Randolph did not have any personal intentions. The ratfolk, Councilman Pyro's wizard tower was still located in the Central District. When Grimm and Nunnally arrived at the wizard tower under Randolph's guidance, a magic puppet butler was already waiting for them. Nunnally did not follow them in, but waited outside with Randolph. Only Grimm followed the marionette into the wizard tower. Perhaps the councilman did not want Grimm to peek into the secrets of his wizard tower, so he only took a few steps into the wizard tower when a dazzling lightning fence appeared in front of him. The lightning fence separated the space inside the wizard tower into different paths, and at the end of each path was a small short-distance teleportation spell formation. The magic puppet butler turned around and walked on one of the paths, and Grimm had no choice but to follow. When the light from the teleportation spell formation dimmed, Grimm found himself in a large private library. In the huge, circular room, there were layers upon layers of bookshelves along the walls, filled with countless books, scrolls, and scrolls on witchcraft. Most of the books were flashing with the dazzling light of a defensive spell formation, faintly resonating with the defense system of the library. Many strange little elves were shuttling back and forth between the bookshelves, as if they were doing some maintenance work. Of course, these little elves were not real living creatures, but puppets made of a special material that could not be identified. Master wants to prepare a general knowledge of witchcraft puppets that are grade 2 and below. The magic puppet butler's voice was metallic, but it was very clear. After receiving the order, all the little elves in the room immediately got busy. They quickly shuttled between the bookshelves, using their slender arms to carry out one book after another. Chapter 297. 2 hours later, Grimm came out of Ratman, Counselor Pyro's wizard tower. On the way back to the Byron family's encampment, Wizard Nunnally stared at Grimm and said calmly, "If you have any more void stones, the Byron family is willing to buy them at an extremely high price. I guarantee you'll be satisfied." Being stared at by the other party, even with Grimm's composure, he could not help but break out in cold sweat. However, he could still control himself and forced a smile. "My lady, that void stone of mine is a trophy from the Planar War. Since I'm not familiar with its characteristics, I recklessly tested it. As for the consequences, you've seen it for yourself." After saying this, Grimm's face revealed a look of extreme regret. Wizard Nunnally stared at Grimm calmly for a long time before withdrawing her gaze and not saying anything else. The atmosphere in the carriage was rather awkward. When they returned to the encampment, they found that everything had returned to normal. The combat team sent out by the Sky Guards had long since left, and the encampment had returned to normal. Even the damaged ground had been repaired by the Magi who stayed behind. 2% of the resources promised by Ratman, Counselor Pyro, sounded like a small amount, but it was enough to make the Byron family one of the top shops in the 12th district. As soon as Nunnally returned to the encampment, she gathered all the Magi in the family and began to make some appropriate arrangements for the future development. Of course, Nunnally would definitely interrogate Wizard Angus in detail in private. Information about Grimm would also be sent to the Central Continent through some secret channels. However, all of this was destined to be in vain. With the speed of Grimm's rise, most families in the scattered Tower Forest region would not have heard of his name. Even Grimm's other rather popular title of Fire Demon only had a little influence around Ferdinand City. Apart from that, it would be extremely difficult for anyone to dig out any more information. After all, with the fall of the Swamp Tower, all the acolytes who knew of him had already turned into dried bones. Everything that happened in the Magic Swamp would be covered up by time. However, Grimm no longer had the strength to understand the subtle psychological changes the Byron family had towards him. Once he returned to the encampment, the first thing he did was to summon Kobe to his room, and the two of them started a secret discussion. When the dense protective spell covered the whole room, Grimm stared at Cabby with an ugly expression and said sternly, "Speak. What did you get for making such a big mess for me this time?" But soon after, Grimm was shocked by what Kirby took out. The blueprint of the Fell Reaver, a sample of the magic energy cannon and its manufacturing blueprint. 7 high-purity elemental crystal cores. Ignoring the goblin Cabby, Grimm's eyes flashed with blue light. The AI chip used the shortest amount of time to scan the blueprints into his brain and quickly began to construct a holographic model based on the data. Soon, a 100-meter-tall mechanical giant with a deafening berserk energy engine and a thick, cumbersome mechanical construct that emanated frightening magical radiance was born. Its main attack method was to rely on its sturdy body and terrifying weight to crush its enemies. When such a large mechanical body raised its huge metallic foot and wantonly crushed the mortal army, the sound of flesh and bones being crushed would indeed be effective in destroying the morale and confidence of its enemies. However, its enemies were destined to be the mortal armies. If it wanted to rely on such trash to fight against Magi, perhaps a small swamp spell would be able to easily defeat it. However, such a Fell Reaver was not completely trash. At least from the blueprint, the energy barrier and the method of using magic energy to protect the body's core still had some research value. It could be seen that the Goblin Empire that designed this blueprint did not have a complete set of spells. Perhaps the goblins were a group of people who were insulated from spells. They lacked the means to directly use elemental force, so they could only focus on the fusion of elemental force and mechanical constructs. It was no wonder that they called this gigantic mechanical giant a Fell Reaver. It was practically a Gundam from another world. However, it was not powered by mysterious spell formations or runes, but by a combination of elemental force and metallic machinery. Magic machinery. Calling it magic machinery is quite appropriate. After understanding this Fell Reaver from another world, Grimm simply scanned the book on witchcraft puppets into his mind and began to model them one by one before converting them into data. In terms of the essence, magic machinery and the goblins from the sorcerer world were related by blood. Both of them used their huge bodies and sturdy bodies to crush their enemies. The difference was the goblins had an animated mechanical heart within their bodies, so they had some basic human-like intelligence. Therefore, Magi only needed to give them some simple instructions, and they would be left alone. Magic machinery, on the other hand, was just a machine. Although it had a magical energy system, it did not have any independent intelligence to speak of. Therefore, the operation of magic machinery could not be separated from the control of intelligent life forms. The core of the goblins was the mechanical heart, while the core of magic machinery was a small console. This was perhaps the only difference between the two. Seriously speaking, magic cannons were also a type of use of magic energy. They could guide the energy stored in magic crystals and release it in the form of pure energy. When a fire elemental crystal was inserted into a magic cannon, the attack form was similar to a witchcraft fireball. However, the goblins called it an energy bomb. When an ice elemental crystal was inserted, it would fire a freezing ray. When an electric elemental crystal was inserted, it would turn into a taser gun. When a negative energy crystal was inserted, it would fire a corrosive ray. Although the goblins did not have any talent in spells, they were good at using energy. Grimm estimated that even the ordinary version of the magic cannons could reach an astonishing 20 to 30 degrees of damage per shot. This attack power was indeed a little low compared to a wizard spell attack that could reach up to 100 degrees. However, magic cannons were not like witchcraft equipment that could only be used by wizards with elemental talent. Magic cannons were a completely simplified elemental crystal launcher. Even an ordinary person would instantly have the power of an advanced wizard apprentice. The goblins were not stupid. They would not sell their most powerful weapon to Cabby. If these magic cannons were the lowest level of magic weapons, they would only need to develop magic weapons with an attack power of 100 degrees to instantly give their people the power of a magus. Moreover, the cooldown time of magic weapons was short, so they could basically achieve this. This allowed them to have a higher attack frequency when fighting against acolytes. 10 ugly goblins equipped with magic cannons could easily overturn 10 fully armed sorcerer apprentices. If the entire goblin plane was popularized with magic weapons, their overall power would be comparable to some medium-sized planes. However, Grimm's crazy conjecture was quickly rejected by the AI chip. The reason it rejected was also irrefutable. The so-called Goblin Empire's overall power could not reach Grimm's conjecture. The main reason they were limited in their development was the lack of elemental crystals. As the saying goes, success is due to low magic. Failure is also due to low magic. It was precisely because the Goblin Empire was in a plane with low magic power that they generally lacked talent in magic and were forced to walk the path of magic technology. However, for magic technology to develop rapidly, a large source of energy was indispensable. The Goblin plane, with low magic power, naturally did not have a large reserve of elemental crystals, so they had to find another suitable source of energy to develop their magic technology. From this perspective, Grimm was very optimistic about the Goblin Empire. As long as they could solve the problem of the source of magical energy, with their use of magical weapons and machinery, the goblins would rapidly rise as a powerful armed force that would raise eyebrows in the multiverse. To be honest, if he could control such a natural servant race, Grimm felt that it would not be a problem for him to conquer the universe. However, before he had absolute power, it was impossible to suppress these wild goblins, so he could only bear with it. Only when his strength reached a new level and his subordinates had enough chips to deal with a planar war would he have the chance to consider invading this so-called Goblin Empire. With this understanding, Grimm could only comfort the Goblin Cabby with gentle words to boost his courage. He even specially approved a batch of resources and funds for Cabby to maintain contact with the Goblin Empire from another plane. However, in order to avoid raising a tiger, Grimm drew a red line for Cabby. What kinds of things could be traded and what kinds of things couldn't be traded, everything was listed clearly. Grimm wanted Cabby to keep Gazruvi hanging with continuous trades, but he could not really nurture this vicious wolf into a ferocious tiger. Hence, every time he made a deal with Gazruvi, Grimm had to personally look over the items and check them strictly. Cabby could only be a yes man towards this point. In Cabby's eyes, integrity, loyalty, and kinship were all fleeting clouds. The only thing he needed to care about was obtaining his master's favor. As for selling out his own race to his master, as long as the price was right, he would gladly do it. Chapter 298. When the moon once again climbed up to the sky, The cold and desolate light shone through the thick fog into the mushroom hut. Alice held onto the almost red-hot soup pot, silently raising her head to look at the wisp of moonlight that shone through the cracks of the wooden hut. Her bloodshot eyes were filled with deep despair, sorrow, and numbness. Crying, begging, cursing, she had already done everything she could in the past few days. Unfortunately, facing a stubborn old witch, regardless of whether she pretended or revealed her true feelings, they were all ignored by the other party. The only thing the old witch would do every day was to stand on a tall wooden stool, stirring the soup pot with a huge wooden ladle while rambling on and on about some stories that no one could understand. And that hateful black snake was entrenched on the roof beam above the soup pot. Every time Alice wanted to escape, it would appear at the right time, hissing and flicking its tongue to force her back. The gloomy swamp, the scary haunted house, the ugly witch, and the creepy black snake. All of this sounded like a bizarre, dark fairy tale. But what it brought to Alice was unbearable torture and suffering. Alice could not sleep and did not dare to sleep. Every time she fell asleep, the space barrier on the surface of her body would disappear, and what awaited her was the boiling soup. Her tender, white, and petite body would be scalded red, instantly covered with big and small blisters and festering bright red flesh. And when she mournfully wailed in the soup pot, no matter where she was, the old witch would run overexcitedly, scooping up the scarlet soup with a ladle, and drink it in one gulp. In the old witch's own words, the soup that was soaked in Alice's blood carried a trace of the taste of fate. Therefore, the only thing Alice could do was to maintain a clear mind at all times, using all her strength to fight against the exhaustion of her body. Every time she felt that she could not hold on any longer, she would silently remove the space barrier on her left hand, and then use the piercing pain to stimulate her tired spirit, driving away the heavy drowsiness. After a few days, her left hand had been steamed by the boiling soup until there was not a single inch of flesh left unscathed, and a thick layer of purplish-black blood crusted over. Before he could completely heal, a new burn would appear. In this way, Alice barely made it through the last 2 days. When Grim appeared in the mushroom hut, Alice was on the verge of a mental breakdown. He was in a daze and seemed to have lost all sense of the changes in the outside world. But what was surprising was that even in this situation, Alice was still wrapped in a thin layer of space membrane that protected her from the boiling soup. Seeing Alice's miserable state, Grim's heart of the Balrog in his chest violently beat twice, and he almost broke free from the witchcraft seal. The anger in his heart burned through his entire body. 10 days have passed. I'm here to take Alice away, Grim said coldly. He then reached his arms into the boiling hot pot and scooped up Alice. Seeing Alice's completely purplish-black left hand and the spots of festering skin and blood crusts on her body, Grim's black eyes lit up with 2 small flames. He used his last bit of rationality to suppress his anger, and with both hands holding Alice's weightless body, he turned around and strode away. What was strange was that the short and stooped old witch only watched all this with a smile and did not interfere with Grim's actions. When Grim's tall body was completely covered by the dark swamp's fog, the old witch stopped smiling and let out a mournful cry like an owl. Fate! 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 When Alice woke up again, she was already in a clean and bright room. The room was decorated very simply. A single bed, a chair, and a brown wooden table were all the furnishings in the room. In front of the wooden table, a tall and sturdy figure was sitting there, quietly reading a book. Alice wriggled a little under the soft lace of the quilt. However, based on the silky touch, she could sense that she wasn't wearing any clothes. At the same time, a cooling sensation came from the wounds all over her body. Mixed with the burning pain, it made her feel unbearably itchy. Alice gently raised her left hand, which was wrapped in a dense white cloth like a dumpling. She brought it to her nose and sniffed and could smell the scent of hemostatic cream and toner. Her mouth felt numb and bitter, and when she stuck out her tongue, she realized that there was a leaf of life in her mouth. Humph, you threw me to that old witch without saying a word, and now you want to win me over with these small favors? Dream on. She did not know why, but even though she was disdainful, Alice could not stop her tears from flowing down. With a magus' keen senses, even the smallest movements in the room could not escape his eyes. When Alice's eyes blurred with tears, Grimm's tall figure had already appeared in front of the bed, bending over and looking down at her. Does your wound still hurt? Yes. I've already applied medicine on it. With your physique, you should be able to fully recover in 2 or 3 days, and there won't be any obvious scars. Yes. After the simple conversation, there was an indescribable silence. They had all been acolytes before, and had all climbed their way up from the bottom. They had experienced at least 800, if not 1,000, terrifying hardships. In comparison, the torture they had suffered this time was not the worst. No matter which acolyte it was, they had to bear all the suffering alone. Even if they bled to the point of tears, no one would bear it for them. Hence, regardless of whether they were magi or acolytes, they had developed a cold and unsociable temperament. Hence, at this moment, Grimm, who had taken the initiative to show concern, and Alice, who was being cared for, did not know how to continue. Alice, where did you stay for 10 days? Do you know why that old witch treated you like this? Grimm suddenly thought of a question and could not help but ask. What other reason could there be? Of course it's because she's gone mad. She's a nervous woman. Alice gnashed her teeth at the thought of the torture she had suffered during this time. I have a feeling. Grimm frowned and hesitated. What kind of feeling? She seems to want to help you. Grimm hesitated for a moment and finally said what was in his mind. Help me. Alice's eyes were wide open, and she almost jumped out of the quilt. She waved her left hand angrily and roared, I've been hurt so badly by her, and you still say she wants to help me? Are you crazy? Grimm was not frightened by Alice's angry roar, and a thoughtful expression appeared on his face. You and I both know very well that the Northern Witches are a closed group that is very particular about tradition and inheritance. That Loanna belongs to a different school of witches, so she won't easily hurt you to avoid interfering with the selection of the Destiny Witches. So what? If what we know is true, don't you think her behavior is very strange? Of course she's strange, because she's already gone mad. Alice, calm down. Don't let anger confuse your reason. Think carefully about what kind of message she wants to send you with this behavior. Alice still shook her head in confusion. Her behavior makes you very angry and also makes you feel very weak. So what do you want the most when your emotions are brewing to the extreme? Power. Yes, it's power. You need power to strengthen yourself, and you need power to avenge yourself. So where does your power come from? Where does my power come from? Alice repeated in confusion. You've awakened the talent of the Destiny Witches. Although there are many Destiny Witches who awaken at the same time, you have to find the source of your power. Alice shook her head as if she didn't understand. Although she was talented and intelligent, she still couldn't keep up with Grimm's rapid thinking due to the lack of experience. You must always remember the source of your power, Grimm patiently taught her. You've awakened the talent of the Destiny Witches, so the source of your power can only belong to the word destiny. Alice, let me ask you, do you believe in destiny? Alice raised her head and looked at Grimm's determined eyes. She finally began to seriously think about the true meaning of the talent of the Destiny Witches for the first time. Do I believe in destiny? Do I believe in destiny? Alice asked herself over and over again, and for a while, she became dumbfounded. Yes, ever since she awakened her talent, the power of space had become like an instinct to her. It became an ability that she could summon and leave at will. Relying on this powerful talent, she could almost easily defeat all opponents of the same rank. Her great power made her confused. Everyone's respect and praise made her feel like she was floating. One success after another made her intoxicated, and she had forgotten where her real power came from. Destiny? Destiny. Thinking back to the journey after becoming a wizard apprentice, she seemed to have never consciously understood or grasped the meaning of destiny. She just enjoyed the glory that the talent of destiny brought her, but she never tried to approach it or understand it. At this moment, when she successfully tasted the humiliation of being weak, when she once again yearned for greater power, what should she do? Should she meditate day after day like other wizards, accumulate knowledge and resources, and strengthen her power? Or Alice suddenly felt lost. Even if she recognized her own path forward and understood the nature of her power, how could she understand the illusory fate? Could it be that shouting "Destiny, I believe in you" to the sky would give her more power? Alice still couldn't find a clear way out. She finally raised her head and looked at Grimm with hope in her eyes. "What should I do? Teach me." This was the first time that Alice had sincerely begged. "Do you believe in destiny?" Grimm asked again in a serious tone. Chapter 299. Would the followers of the Destiny Witches not believe in fate? This question seemed absurd, but it struck Alice like a bolt of lightning, instantly making her dumbfounded. I of course believe in fate," Alice answered hesitantly, but her tone was getting smaller and weaker. Ever since she had the strange spatial talent, she had regarded this as her instinct, and had never tried to trace it back to its source. As for the illusory fate that gave her all this, except for when Alice would inadvertently think of it and praise it a few times in her spare time, during the days when she became an apprentice, fate was like a non-existent god, with no sense of existence at all. There were less than 9 years left before the selection ceremony of the Destiny Witches. It could be imagined that all the people who had awakened the bloodline talent of the Destiny Witches would gather in the north, where the real destiny which would be decided. And there was only one place for the Destiny Witch. Once one of the Awakened Ones held the ceremony to officially become the Destiny, which the rest of the Awakened Ones would die a painful death, and all the power of fate would gather on the real Destiny Witch. So, today, 8 years later, Alice would either live or die. At that time, she would face the first life and death limit in her journey of fate. So what was it that decided her fate? Strength? Of course, if Alice had the strength of a level 2 wizard after 8 years, it would not be a problem to sweep the rest of the Awakened Ones. At that time, no one would be able to take the title of Destiny Witch from her hands. But was this possible? 8 years was not a long time, but it was not a short time either. If Alice worked hard enough, she was still very sure that she could smoothly advance to an official wizard, but it was absolutely impossible to jump to a level 2 wizard. It could be imagined that there would be a lot of Awakened Ones who could become wizards, and how could she stand out from the many Awakened Ones and suppress the others? Her spatial talent was indeed excellent enough, and her strength was also strong enough, but how much worse could the other Awakened Ones' talents be compared to her? In this cruel competition of life and death, no Awakened One would be willing to give up their own life to save others. Therefore, the selection of the Destiny, which was bound to be extremely cruel and bloody. Those Awakened Ones who were not prepared or did not make sufficient preparations were destined to become stepping stones for others. They would wail in pain as they watched others step onto the high platform of fate and then take away all the talents, bloodlines, and abilities that originally belonged to them. Alice's face turned white with fear at the thought of such a terrible and tragic scene. For the first time in her life, Alice felt as if she could not use up all the energy in her body. She clenched her small fists and tried to encourage herself. "Alice, you can do it. Come on, work hard. I will definitely become the most powerful witch." Ouch! Before she could finish the motivational ceremony, Grimm knocked her on the head. "If you are determined to be the most powerful witch, I can say with certainty that you will never become a Destiny Witch." Grimm glared at her fiercely. "Looks like I'll have to reconsider if I should continue to invest in you." "Why?" Alice bared her canine teeth angrily. "If I don't work hard to become the strongest, how can I defeat them?" "Use your brain, idiot." Grimm shook his head, as if the other party was hopeless. "You chose the Destiny Witches. The Destiny Witches. The core of this profession is always the word destiny. Therefore, it doesn't need the most powerful one, but the one closest to destiny." Alice's body was only the size of an 8-year-old girl, but her mental age was only 15 or 16. Although she was intelligent and gifted with profound knowledge, when it came to the heavy topic of destiny, she could not grasp it at all. Then I don't have to work on improving my strength anymore, and I can use all my time to study destiny? Alice asked timidly. Asterisk bang. Asterisk before she could say anything. She was knocked on the head again. Why did you hit me again? Alice held her head with both hands and pouted. She felt so wrong that she was about to cry. Didn't you say that the destiny witches rely on destiny, not strength? Why can't you understand? Grimm had a look of exasperation on his face. Strength is your guarantee of survival. Destiny is the key to your victory. So you have to improve your strength first and ensure that you can survive. Only then will you have a chance to win. I dare say that the first batch of Destiny witches to be eliminated will definitely be those who do not have the strength to advance to become wizards. And then, as for those who advance to become wizards, if they can't do anything to each other, then Destiny will be the only thing they can rely on. But how can something like Destiny be strengthened? That's simple. You have to advance to become a wizard as soon as possible so that you have the strength to survive. After that, work hard to learn divination and prophecy. After all, this is the ultimate weapon that decides your life and death. Then what I need to do now, the first thing you need to do now, is to find a way to make yourself believe in destiny. It was not a false verbal belief, but a genuine, wholehearted belief. You can lie to me, but you can't lie to your heart, and you can't lie to destiny. So, little girl, from today onwards, work hard to become a believer of destiny. Alice held her head in her hands and nodded heavily in the quilt. After Alice fell into a deep sleep once more, Grimm sat by the wooden table and took out a crystal talisman in the shape of a pin to study it. This was the puppet talisman that Ratfolk Counselor Paro had traded with him. With it, Grimm could easily carry his first metal golem around with him after he created it. When Grimm had first obtained it, he had thought of using the AI chip's data scanning and analysis abilities to decipher the mysteries within the puppet talisman. Then, he could mass-produce them himself. However, after a few days of fumbling around, this unrealistic fantasy was shattered. Damn it, this puppet amulet isn't a dimensional space that can store giant metal puppets like I expected. It's a strange witchcraft. The puppet talisman that could store a 10-meter-tall war golem with a wave of his hand was not a spatial equipment, but a sealing spell. Seeing this, Grimm could not help but be enraged. He had originally thought that with Alice's spatial innate talent and the Void Stone, he would be able to successfully clone the puppet talisman as long as he could decipher the barrier. Who would have thought that he would end up empty-handed? Thinking about it again, Grimm couldn't help but be amused by his delusions. If the puppet talisman was so easy to decipher, the Silver Alliance would not have monopolized this technique for thousands of years. Nowadays, high-ranked magi from the other large organizations could only travel hundreds of millions of miles to the Silver Alliance to seek help if they wanted to carry a metal golem with them. The Magus Association in the eastern part of the continent had gathered many powerful magi, but they still couldn't decipher this puppet talisman seal. After studying it for 2 days, Grimm confirmed that he could not decipher this seal with his current abilities, so he could only give up. After putting away the puppet talisman, Grimm couldn't help but start to think about his next journey. His main mission in Sky City had been completed. Although he wanted to stay for a while longer in this area where arcane magi gathered, he felt that it would be safer to return to Ferdinand City as soon as possible after considering the negative effects of the Void Stone. After making up his mind, Grimm immediately contacted Wizard Angus and asked him to help him book a ticket back to the Scattered Tower Forest in 10 days. He and the Goblin Cabbie went on a crazy shopping spree. Every day, they would frequently go to the shops in the Outer Ring, trying their best to collect things that would be useful to them. Grimm had already earned a large amount of magic crystals after helping the Byron family win the arcane competition. Now, he decided to go on shopping spree. He spent almost all the magic crystals he had on him, exchanging them for countless materials, resources, and knowledge. At the beginning, Grimm was hoping to buy a batch of potions that could help increase his power of the will. However, after asking around for a couple of shops, he gave up. The reason was that it was too expensive. Super expensive, too. Eris Nightmare was a potion that could help increase the power of the will of an official magus. Every time it was used, it could increase a magus power of the will by 0. 12. Its base price was 1,400 magic crystals per bottle, and it had a huge side effect. Just like its name suggested, magi who used this potion would suddenly fall into a strange illusion at a certain time every night. They could not break free with their own strength, and no one could wake them up. Only by silently enduring the nightmare for 2 hours could the person involved wake up. Such a terrifying side effect was a huge safety hazard for the magus who took the potion. As for the other potion, the evil spirit water, it was even more terrifying. Magi who used this potion would be especially favored by vengeful spirits and undead for a long period of time. If it did not take precautions, it was extremely easy for them to be possessed by evil spirits. Therefore, magi who had consumed the evil spirit water would not dare to explore any ancient ruins or tombs. Otherwise, they would be like a magnet, attracting all the spirits out of the place. Any magus with a brain would feel their hairs stand on end, and their souls would not be able to leave their bodies. Most of the other magus potions were the same. They all had a despairing price and terrifying side effects. If Grimm wanted to increase his power of the will by taking potions, he would need to increase it by 10 or 8 times. Chapter 300. Compared to the excitement on the way here, the return journey was rather dull. They were still in the same regions, but when the floating warship flew over, the number of monsters that dared to chase it had decreased significantly. At first, Grimm had some doubts, but after communicating with the Magi on the ship, he found out that the Harpy Kingdom had forcibly abducted a few Magi. This had undoubtedly enraged the higher-ups of the Silver Alliance, who were in charge of the safety of the sea route. Thus, while Grimm was in Sky City, the Silver Alliance had organized a group of Grade 3 Magi to forcefully break into the Harpy Kingdom, slaughtering almost 1,000 enemies in one go, including a few bird shamans. As for the Magi who had been abducted, unfortunately, they only managed to save 2. The rest of them hadn't survived the brutal mating process and had been drained of their essence blood. As for the 2 that survived, they were both physique refinement magi, with physiques similar to magical beasts. Unfortunately, by the time they were rescued, they had already been sucked dry. It seemed that without a year or 2 of meticulous care, they would not be able to return in normal. It was precisely because of the Silver Alliance's actions that the monsters on this sea route had temporarily calmed down. Thus, 2.5 months later, Grimm brought Alice and Cabby back to the central continent. Their first stop was, of course, Guat Port, a public city in the westernmost part of the Scattertalon region. After staying here for 2 days, Grimm and his party waited for an airship to leave for the central continent. Thus, after 5 days, they successfully returned to Modus City. Not daring to stay in Modus City for too long, Grimm and the other 2 secretly bought a small carriage and left the city. In the pitch-black forest, a temporary bonfire crackled as it burned. The goblin Cabby was busy preparing dinner. He set up a metal tripod on top of the fire, placed a pot of soup, and began to wash the ingredients. Alice, on the other hand, rested her chin on her hands and sat by the bonfire in a daze. Ever since Grimm had taught her a lesson, she had been like this a lot. Grimm and Cabby greeted each other, then stood up and walked into the dark forest. He wanted to see what the wilderness of another world looked like before dinner. The trees of the Sorcerer Continent had always grown tall and straight. Coupled with the dense foliage, the forest was dark and silent. Only a few moonlight grasses and fluorescent mushrooms faintly emitted a cold light. There were no bushes, no knee-high grass, just dewy brown earth, covered with a thick layer of yellow leaves, and then patches of green grass. There are very few small animals here. After all, it was close to a public road, so it was impossible for there to be any large magical beasts. The rest of the wild beasts in the forest had mostly become practice targets for the sorcerer apprentices. Therefore, Grim didn't see any herbivores or carnivores even after walking for half a mile in the dark. Just as Grim was about to turn back in disappointment, he suddenly stopped in his tracks. Grim turned his head to look at the flank and suddenly became more vigilant. There, a tall humanoid figure was walking over with heavy footsteps. The rotten branches were crushed one by one under his feet, making crackling sounds. In the quiet and dark forest, the sound traveled very far. Grim licked his lips and narrowed his eyes. A faint blue light flickered in his eyes. He was fully prepared to fight. Secretly, he sent a warning to Alice and KB through the telepathic bond. Under the powerful scanning of elemental vision, the approaching humanoid figure was overflowing with intense red light. It was a sign of extreme danger and hostility. Moreover, Grim could sense a powerful yet reserved and terrifying aura from the other party. In Grim's retina, the energy in the figure's body was extremely strong. Most of the energy nodes were distributed in the limbs, some important joints, and some internal organs. This allowed Grim to determine that the visitor was a physique refinement magus. In the dead of the night, and in a secluded and uninhabited forest, the other party's intentions were clear without question. Grim was just curious. He had been very low-key when he returned. So how did the unlucky hand association find his traces? Your fire devil, Grim? The tall figure spoke and stopped 30 meters away. The voice was deep and rich. It was a man's voice. At this moment, the tall figure took another step forward. A ray of silver moonlight shone on him through the treetops, illuminating his appearance and figure. It was a powerful anatomy refinery wizard wearing blood-red metal armor. His body was surrounded by blood-red ripples, and he carried a huge two-handed sword on his back. Under the moonlight, his face was twisted and hideous, and the ugly scars on his face wriggled like centipedes. He also wore blood-red metal gloves on his hands. When he clenched his fists, the edges of his knuckles were as sharp as knives. It was a chilling sight. "Bloody Butcher?" Grim asked in a probing tone. The figure's appearance was quite unique, so Grim quickly thought of some legendary figures. "It's useless even if you know my name. You will die here today." The Bloody Butcher grinned and showed a hideous smile. In the next second, before the powerful voice faded away, a red shadow had already approached Grim's side. A violent and ferocious iron fist with a whistling wind and a pungent smell of blood was aimed at his heart. A black and red lava shield appeared between the two of them. Before the high-temperature flames on the shield could burn the shield, the iron fist of the blood shadow landed right in the middle of the shield. With a loud bang, the lava shield shattered. The first time, before Grim's lava shield could fully materialize, it had already been smashed into smithereens and lava fragments by the enemy's heavy blows. Whoosh! The iron fist that was wrapped in flames penetrated the dense protective barrier and hit Grim's abdomen. Although the lava shield had dissipated almost half of the iron fist's power, the remaining power was not weaker than an elemental attack of 60 degrees. Moreover, most elemental attacks were scattered. The power of the attack was scattered but not concentrated. However, the iron fist of the opponent was completely restrained, only concentrating the power of the attack into an area the size of a fist. Therefore, elemental attacks could not be compared to elemental attacks. Grim was startled. He suddenly patted his chest, and a resistance ring of fire suddenly bloomed. The resistance ring of fire was a powerful shockwave of flames, but it spread in a ring shape. All individuals within the range of the flames would not only suffer from the damage of the flames, but also a certain degree of physical impact. Therefore, the resistance ring of fire was usually used by fire wizards to repel their enemies. However, it was too difficult to repel an anatomy wizard with a hastily released ring of fire. As a result, Grim staggered backwards, his chest was struck by the wind from the punch, and his entire body was sent flying. While he was still in the air, the sound of bones cracking came from Grim's chest, and he spat out a mouthful of black blood. Blood Shadow roared, and the bloody aura around his body exploded in front of him. With a single step, he chased after Grimm's falling body. Two iron fists attacked consecutively, and the surging blood shadow smashed towards Grimm like raindrops. There was a loud explosion. Flames burst out in the dark forest. Grimm's tall body instantly disappeared in the pillar of fire that shot up into the sky. At the same time, 100 meters away from where the two were fighting, flames surged, and Grimm staggered backwards. The bloody figure roared again, twisting his body in midair. He once again shot towards Grimm like an arrow. "Die!" Grimm shouted in a low voice, and with a raise of his hand, 3 explosive fireballs flew towards his opponent in a triangular formation. As soon as the explosive fireballs left his hand, Grimm raised his right palm into the air, and a lava fireball the size of a wash basin quickly formed. Blood Shadow did not choose to dodge the 3 exploding fireballs that were flying at him. As an experienced anatomy refinery sorcerer, he knew this very well. Once he chose to dodge, then the opponent would continuously throw elemental spells at him. If he allowed the opponent to increase the distance between them, then the terrifying power of a fire wizard would be fully displayed. Therefore, without hesitation, the Bloody Butcher raised both of his arms to cover his face, and a powerful bloody aura surged around his body. He actually chose to take the explosive fireballs head-on. Bang, bang, bang. After 3 consecutive explosions, the dark forest was dyed red. The violent elemental flames engulfed everything within a 20-meter radius into a sea of fire. Tall trees that could be hugged by a person were instantly set ablaze, and wood shavings and debris were ignited by the sea of fire. The intense flames were blinding. The valiant Blood Shadow rushed through the center of the explosion, and as soon as he reached the edge of the sea of fire, he saw a rapidly flying lava fireball and a figure not far away. Damn it, this fire demon's casting speed is really scary. While cursing in his heart, the Bloody Butcher pulled out his sword and rushed forward. The sword in his hand shone with a cold, bloody light as it directly cut through the lava fireball. When he tried to follow suit and rush through the lava fireball again, a huge flaming fist opened up in front of him and forcefully pushed him back into the sea of fire. Within the shattered lava fireball, scarlet lava scattered on the green grass, and in an instant, the ground was scorched. A tall humanoid figure surrounded by fierce flames stood there silently, blocking the Bloody Butcher's path of attack. Under the cover of the Inferno Tyrant, Grimm finally found an opportunity. He took out 2 or 3 bottles of potions of different colors from his waist pouch and drank them all in one go. After dealing with the injuries on his body, Grimm raised his head, and 2 clusters of bright flames quickly burned in his black eyes. Chapter 301. In the dark forest, there was more than one battlefield. Through the faint night fog, a huge elemental roar could be heard from the temporary camp in the distance. The sudden explosion of elemental waves swept everything around it, turning the small temporary camp into a turbulent sea of elemental waves. Even from half a mile away, Grimm could clearly feel the terrifying aura that could destroy the world. Through the soul contract, he could know that Alice and Cabby were not dead and were frantically escaping from the destroyed camp. But were there any pursuers behind them? Had they escaped the pursuit of the opposing sorcerer? All of this was an unknown factor, and if he wanted to rescue them, the first thing he needed to do was to defeat this damned sorcerer in front of him, the Bloody Butcher. Just as Grimm was hesitating, the Inferno Tyrant and the Bloody Butcher had already started fighting in a frenzy. In the sea of fire, the Inferno Tyrant's tall, flaming body was slashed by the other party until sparks flew and the flames surged. And the wild flames that splashed recklessly also burned the Bloody Butcher, causing him to scream in pain. Even the 2-handed sword in his hand began to heat up in the terrifying flames, gradually turning into a red-hot soldering iron. The Bloody Butcher's sturdy body emitted even more blood-colored energy that lingered around him, protecting his body from being burnt into charcoal by the terrifying heat. But this kind of protection could not last long. He had to cut down this peak level one fire elemental in the shortest amount of time, or else this simple blood barrier would eventually be corroded by the flames. The blood-colored energy extended to the blade, and with the help of this super corrosive blood energy, the Bloody Butcher's waving two-handed sword also caused great damage to the fire elemental. But most of the time, the Bloody Butcher had to rely on his nimble steps to circle around the fire elemental, avoiding the other party's violent and ferocious fire spells. Every time a terrifying elemental fireball exploded near him, he could feel a stinging pain on the surface of his skin. 130 degrees or 140 degrees. Without accurate measurements, he did not know how strong the fire elemental's attack was, nor did he want to know. He only knew that every time the fire elemental roared and stretched out its hands towards him, he had to quickly dodge. Once he was hit, he wasn't confident that he could withstand the terrifying flame explosion with his high vitality. Although he knew from the intelligence that the target had a terrifying elemental puppet, the strength of this elemental puppet still exceeded his expectations. As a physique refinery wizard with a constitution of 17 points, the Bloody Butcher's physical and magical resistance had reached an astonishing level. It could even be compared to some coarse, thick-skinned magical beast that specialized in defense. Even without the help of the blood-colored metal armor on his body, he could easily withstand elemental and physical attacks below 60 degrees naked. This also meant that even if he fought with a group of acolytes barehanded and naked, it would be difficult for them to harm his body in the slightest. On the other hand, he was able to withstand the attacks of enemies in the double digits and rush in front of them. Then, he would use his two-handed greatsword to crush them one by one as easily as killing cockroaches. However, even with such a strong body, the Bloody Butcher still did not dare to take the fire elemental's fireball head-on. He had a feeling that if he was hit by the fireball, it would be very painful. It had to be said that the Bloody Butcher's physical senses were very accurate. In Grimm's mind, every attack of the Inferno Tyrant spells had already reached an astonishing 150 degrees. This was far beyond the highest threshold that a regular wizard could reach. Among all the species that had mastered extraordinary powers, the human body was undoubtedly one of the more fragile ones. Therefore, when human wizards absorbed and accumulated magical elements, the concentration of elements in their flesh per unit area was far lower than that of magical beasts. This was reflected in spells. The strength of a human wizard's elemental attack was limited by the strength of the body, toughness, and other factors. It was very difficult to reach the level of pure and violent attacks of magical beasts. Even with Grimm's elemental body and his specialization in fire, he could only increase the strength of his attack to 115 degrees. On the other hand, the Inferno Tyrant was indeed a powerful elemental demon puppet. Even though he did not have a strong body to match his level 2 essence crystal, the fire element spells that he could activate with just a wave of his hand were still terrifyingly powerful. 150 degrees. This was enough to kill some regular wizards in a second. Grimm endured the intense pain in his thoracic spine and straightened his body, sensing the movements in the distance. Although Alice was out of breath from being chased, she still took the time to warn Grimm. It was not one magus who had invaded the camp, but two. If this anatomy refinement magus was included, the number of magi who had chased after him tonight had reached a shocking number of 3. At the end of the day, he was only a magus who had advanced. Grimm had seen the other party strategy very clearly. They would use this anatomy refinement magus to hold him back, while the other 2 magi would quickly kill his servant. Then, the 3 of them would surround him and kill him in one fell swoop. From this attack strategy, it could be seen that the other party did not want the news of tonight to leak out. That was why they did not hesitate to use a sledgehammer to kill a chicken, and let the 2 magi lower themselves to chase after his servant. Since that was the case, there was nothing to hesitate about. Killing this anatomy refinement magus before the other 2 magi arrived was the only way to survive tonight. Raising his head, Grimm looked at the blood-red figure that was quickly cruising beside the Inferno Tyrant. He muttered a few strange and awkward-sounding incantations and pointed at the other party. The elemental flames that were everywhere around the blood-red figure suddenly condensed, and a strange flaming chain instantly wrapped around the other party's body. For an anatomy refinement magus with 17 points of vitality and 14 points of strength, a flaming chain with 5 points of elemental damage was just a small spell that could be easily shaken off. However, in the instant that the Bloody Butcher's figure was slightly sluggish, the Inferno Tyrant's foot exploded with a pillar of scarlet flames that connected the heavens and the earth. The Bloody Butcher's rough and ferocious face suddenly revealed a look of fear. A violent blood-red aura exploded, instantly shattering the flaming chain and also dispersing the terrifying pillar of fire that enshrouded his body. He stomped heavily on the ground, leaving a pair of deep footprints on the charred ground. Only then did he manage to escape from the fire before the surrounding flames could close in on him. However, before he had a chance to catch his breath, the Inferno Tyrant's berserk fireballs and Grimm's lava fireballs came at him from the left and right. The Bloody Butcher's expression changed drastically, and his footsteps became faster and faster. His entire body turned into a blurry blood-red shadow, cruising around the fire quickly. Sorcery fireballs tore through the air and continuously exploded behind him. Every explosion would be accompanied by the collapse of 2 or 3 tall trees. On the other hand, the soil that shot up from the ground even caused a heavy rain to descend. Damn it, damn it, damn it. The Bloody Butcher's lungs were about to explode from the continuous stream of curses. That damned interception target, Grimm, stood about 20 meters away from the Inferno Tyrant, continuously throwing fire spells at him. Every time he tried to get close to the two people, a series of exploding fireballs and lava fireballs would fly at him. And the two people, as fire barrier, had merged together without a trace. So even though the Bloody Butcher was moving at high speed, he had to endure the burning of the flames at a rate of 30 degrees per second. Although this kind of damage could not do anything to his strong body, it could ignite his clothes at any time. If not for the blood-red metal armor that could protect him, he would probably have to run away at this moment. After all, he was only a physique refinery sorcerer with high vitality and strength. Speed was not his forte, and his main attack method was the two-handed sword with corrosive blood gas. If he was forced to the periphery by the opponent and could not get close, then he could only take a beating without being able to fight back. Whoosh! There was a sharp explosion. Half of a tree trunk whizzed towards Grimm. While still in midair, the tree trunk was hit by the lava fireball and exploded into sparks and debris. Then, in the next moment, a 1-meter square stone whistled towards him again, and it was also smashed into pieces by a series of fireballs in midair. Grimm suddenly turned around and raised his hands lightly. A lava fireball that had been waiting for power flew out quickly, and in front of the path of the fireball, the dense sea of fire suddenly shook violently and split open. The Bloody Butcher raised his two-handed sword high up and rushed out. The blood-red sword mark flashed quickly, and before the super lava fireball could explode, it had already chopped it into pieces of black and red lava. As for the tumbling lava that was wrapped in it, most of it was shaken away. With an earth-shattering roar, the Bloody Butcher's aura surged around him. He swung his huge two-handed sword like a rain of swords, which flew towards Grimm at high speed. If it was any other time, Grimm would have already used a flame leap to escape. Although his vitality was not bad, if he wanted to fight a professional physique refinery sorcerer in close combat, it would be a suicidal action. However, the situation on the battlefield today was dangerous. If this dragged on and he was surrounded by 3 sorcerers, then he would really be in danger. Therefore, facing the terrifying sword formation that was rolling towards him, Grimm did not escape. Instead, he crossed his arms in front of his chest, and a terrifying stream of fire elements condensed to the extreme collided with his opponent. Pooh! The sword formation that was spinning like a top did not slow down at all. It forcefully withstood the impact of the stream of fire and went against the flow, twisting towards Grimm's body bit by bit. The scarlet stream of fire elements was split into 2 in front of the rapidly spinning sword formation, sliding past it from the left and right. The distance between the two sides was less than 10 meters. Between them, apart from the torrent of fire elements that was like a lava waterfall, there was nothing else blocking their way. Both sides gritted their teeth and persevered. The Bloody Butcher hoped to break this final barrier and use the rapid sword formation to mince his opponent into pieces. Grim, on the other hand, gritted his teeth and increased the density and strength of the stream of fire in his hands, trying his best to fight for those precious 5 seconds for the Inferno Tyrant's terrifying attack. Sizzle. Amidst the strange sounds of the flames shattering, the tip of the sword formation was less than half a meter away from Grim's fingertips. Chapter 302. Burning Pain. It was a simple fire elemental spell. The only special thing about it was that it could convert part of the fire damage into physical damage, which would be used on the target's mind. So it could also be seen as a mutated spell. However, when this simple mutated spell was activated by the Inferno Tyrant, it was given 160 degrees of dual elemental damage. So, at the center of the collision, the Bloody Butcher, who had turned into a sword formation, suddenly screamed, and his rapidly spinning body suddenly stopped. In the next second, the already stiff Bloody Butcher was engulfed by the sizzling scarlet flame torrent. Even Grim could not accurately determine how high the temperature at the center of the flames was. Anyway, in his elemental vision, it was already a sea of red. The extremely high temperature twisted and wrinkled the void, and the dense, distorted light and the blinding red light made it hard to look directly at it. Even the center of the red light could not be penetrated by Grim's spiritual perception. With a shrill howl like that of a wild beast, a tall figure rushed out of the scarlet flame torrent. The red flames were still exploding on the tall figure, but the core temperature was much lower than before, so Grim's spiritual power could penetrate it and see the Bloody Butcher's tragic situation. Yes, it was indeed tragic. The terrifying heat had melted almost half of the flesh on his body. Looking around, there was not a single piece of skin on his body that was undamaged. The Bloody Butcher's skin and flesh, which were half a centimeter thick, had been completely charred. As he walked forward step by step, the charred shell that had been shaken cracked inch by inch, revealing the fresh and tender flesh and the muscle fibers that were as tough as steel wire underneath. There was a huge depression in his abdomen, which was shocking to see. Unable to withstand the destruction of Grim's flames, the Bloody Butcher's blood-red metal armor had already melted, turning into balls of golden molten iron that dripped on the ground. The rest had already melted with his skin and flesh, and it was difficult to tell them apart. The Bloody Butcher had rushed out with his arms raised high to protect his face, so his arms that had suffered the impact of the flames could not be seen at all. The melted gauntlets and arm guards gilded his white arm bones with a layer of gold. When he put down his skeleton-like golden arm, an even more sinister and terrifying face was revealed. The Bloody Butcher no longer had any facial skin, hair, or nose. His entire face, flesh, and skin had disappeared. Even his right eye had become a dark, bloody hole, and blood was slowly dripping out of it. At this moment, the Bloody Butcher was glaring at Grim with his remaining eye. The hatred and resentment in his eyes were so intense that it could melt one's soul. He gritted his white teeth so hard that they creaked. It looked like he wanted to devour Grim's flesh. Behind him, in the dark forest, 2 strangely dressed magi slowly walked out, one on the left and one on the right, hindering Grim's path of attack. Having lost the opportunity to kill the Bloody Butcher, Grim stopped in his tracks. The Inferno Tyrant's arms were raised high, and his entire body was wreathed in flames as he stood guard at his side. 1 against 3. The situation was obviously extremely disadvantageous for Grim. He quickly called out to Alice in his mind a few times, but he did not get any response. It was difficult to sense whether she was alive or dead through the simple soul contract. Grim's heart sank. However, the extreme anger and fear of death had also stimulated Grim's anger. The blood in his body gradually boiled, and the inferno demon's heart in his chest continuously beat a deep war drum. "You killed Alice?" Grimm's voice was muffled and hoarse, as if he was trying his best to suppress his emotions. "You mean that pretty and cute little girl?" The magus on the left pulled down his hood, revealing a hissing snake's head. She tasted good. This was a powerful bloodline magus. Even though Grimm's heart was filled with violent killing intent, facing a bloodline magus who was famous for his powerful combat ability still made him shudder. In the sorcerer world, arcane magi were undoubtedly the weakest among the 4 major sorcerer systems. They were either good at making puppets, brewing potions, enchantment alchemy, or summoning from another world. No matter which one they chose, it would take up most of their time as a sorcerer if they wanted to reach a high level. With this burden, professional arcane magi were undoubtedly the weakest in terms of combat ability. Elemental magi and anatomy refinery magi were evenly matched, and each had their own advantages and disadvantages. Elemental magi had extremely high mental strength, so the elemental spells they activated were extremely powerful under the amplification of their mental strength. However, most elemental magi did not have a high physique, so their bodies became their weakest link. Anatomy refinery magi had already tempered their bodies into a kind of human-shaped sorcerer artifact, and every move they made had great power. However, most of their attacks were more focused on close-range physical attacks, so their fighting style was similar to that of warriors, rangers, and assassins in the otherworld. As for bloodline magi, their usual fighting style was similar to that of elemental magi, except that their bodies mastered fewer spells. However, once they successfully revealed the source of their bloodline, they could instantly transform into an ancient monster, combining the long-range attacks of elemental magi and the strong physique of anatomy refinery magi. Therefore, among the 4 major sorcerer systems in the sorcerer world, the most comprehensive and powerful were the bloodline magi. At least in a battle of the same level, bloodline magi were always the strongest and most oppressive. The magus on the right also pulled down her hood, revealing a beautiful woman's face. There was a diamond-shaped tarot diamond between her eyebrows, and under the moonlight, it emitted a hazy, illusory, dazzling light. He seemed to be an elemental magus who walked the path of illusion. The 2 magi who rushed over coldly looked at the miserable appearance of the bloody butcher. Although they looked like they did not care, the vigilance in their eyes gradually became stronger. Although the 2 who came later were confident that they had methods to restrain the bloody butcher, it seemed that Grimm's terrifying strength was not inferior to theirs in order to force him into such a miserable state. Therefore, it was rare that the 2 who came later did not pounce on Grimm and the Inferno Tyrant the moment they entered. Instead, they slowly circled around Grimm and the Inferno Tyrant. "Which one do you choose?" The snake-headed magus tilted his head and looked at the female illusionist. "You're the strongest, so of course you'll be the one to deal with Grimm. Leave this big, elemental magus to me." The beautiful illusionist's smile was overflowing with charm. Even Grimm's heart skipped a beat when he saw it. "Oomph. Your enchantment and illusion spells are ineffective against elemental beings, right?" The snake-headed magus snorted in dissatisfaction. However, he was still very pleased with the other party's humble attitude. "Hee, I have you, my lord. I just need to stall this big guy for a while, and you'll naturally be able to deal with him by then. Will I still be in any danger?" The beautiful illusionist spoke casually, as if it was only natural. "Oomph." The snake-headed magus could not be bothered to bicker with this woman. He turned around and stared at Grimm. His strange, amber-like vertical pupils were calm, and Grimm's figure was reflected within them. Grimm's gaze met with his, and he immediately felt his mind turn sluggish. Even his body felt a little uncomfortable. At the same time, the A.I. chip's ear-piercing alarm sounded in Grimm's mind. "Warning, warning. Detected invasion of a foreign force field. Host body is partially damaged. Please indicate whether to disperse the energy." "I force." Grimm was shocked. He felt a slight numbness in his body and ordered without hesitation, "Disperse it immediately." "I, Chip, Can you determine the nature of the opponent's eye force? Beep. The foreign force field energy has been dispersed. Initial determination. Petrification. Eyes of petrification. Could this be the innate ability of the bloodline creature that the opponent had inherited? Chip, can you deduce the source of the opponent's bloodline? Grim summoned a magma shield to cover the strange eyes of the enemy while he gave the order in his mind. With the snake-headed creature and the eyes of petrification, he should be able to obtain some information. Beep. Matching with the database. There are 11 types of ancient snake bloodlines that possess the eyes of petrification. The scales on the snake's head are small and dense, and the color is gray. Its eyes are amber with dark brown spots. Based on the characteristics, initial determination, black mamba snake, Earth-type monster, probability of 66%. Giant serpent, branch of the ancient Medusa, probability of 27%. The other types have less than 1% probability, not showing for now. Show me the relevant information on the black mamba snake. Grim was practically shouting as he communicated with the AI chip. In any case, mental communication was always the fastest. No matter how complicated the thoughts were, it would only take an instant for them to communicate. In the next second, all the information on the black mamba snake was projected in Grim's mind. Although the information was not complete, it was enough to outline the terrifying and powerful nature of this ancient monster. The black mamba snake was an Earth-type monster, the apex predator of ancient times. It was one of the most terrifying and dangerous species. It possessed powerful physical strength and terrifying spiritual force, and could use its eyes to channel the power of petrification into the bodies of other living beings. Innate abilities. Eyes of petrification, rockfall hell. Just as Grim was retreating, the snake-headed Magus's forked tongue flickered, and its entire body began to expand. In the blink of an eye, it had transformed from a humanoid Magus into a 10-meter-long, terrifying black snake with a body as thick as a water tank. The giant snake slowly raised its head, its terrifying vertical pupils staring at Grim. Earth-yellow smoke rose from the ground, condensing into a rock armor with mysterious patterns on its body. After completing its battle preparations, the giant snake raised its body high up, its terrifying snake-like mouth slightly split open, revealing its white fangs and forked tongue. Fire Demon? What great name! From today onwards, this name no longer exists. After hissing like a declaration of war, the giant snake suddenly pounced forward, opening its fangs and biting towards Grim, whose body was covered in raging flames. Chapter 303. The multicolored light instantly illuminated the entire forest. When the light gradually faded, darkness once again enveloped the land. The Inferno tyrant, whose entire body was wreathed in flames, had already disappeared without a trace. The female illusionist had also disappeared with him. Illusion? Sealing technique? Or was it some other strange thing Grim did not have time to think? He could only use flame leap to leave the place, and then reappeared in an empty space in the forest 100 meters away. A loud snapping sound rang out. The giant serpent that the bloodline sorcerer had transformed into closed its mouth, emitting a loud noise that shook the entire forest. Even the giant tree behind Grim, that needed 2 people to wrap their arms around, was snapped in half by the serpent's bite. Then, in the midst of the flying sawdust, half of the giant tree fell down with a creaking sound, branches and leaves still on it. The loud rumbling sound was still echoing in the dark forest. The giant serpent's huge body was like a rampaging golem that had lost control. It smashed through the rows of giant trees that were blocking its way and slithered towards Grim at high speed. Along the way, grass flew everywhere, and mud billowed. Its momentum was enormous, and its power was ferocious. No one dared to imagine what would happen if they were to be hit head-on by such a huge monster. Grim roared loudly as he looked at the huge shadow that was pressing towards him like an avalanche. He looked at the pair of strange amber eyes that were as bright as stars in the darkness. Endless abyssal flames gushed out from the flame demon's heart along with the surging flame energy, flowing through his veins and meridians rapidly throughout his body. Fierce flames surged around Grimm's body, and his body also began to expand rapidly. The skin on the surface of his body was torn apart by the violent force, causing his flesh to split open in an instant. His entire body was covered with cuts and bruises. However, the black and red lava that flowed out quickly filled up the gaps, turning his body into a flame demon's body made of flesh, flames, and lava in an instant. Two thick and sinister curved horns began to appear bit by bit. Grimm moved his body in pain, his huge hooves stomping heavily on the scorched ground. The terrifying heat instantly vaporized all the water in the soil. Scarlet magma gushed out from the ground and quickly converged. Soon, a large pool of magma was formed under Grimm's hooves. More lava and flames began to gather in Grimm's right hand, and in the blink of an eye, it had condensed into a gigantic and terrifying beheading sword. Scorching flames, scarlet lava, thick black smoke, and the choking smell of sulfur. In the blink of an eye, a 5-meter-tall Balrog with flames and magma flowing over its body stood up in this terrifying world forged from red-black magma. Its body was filled with crimson magma, and the surface of its body was solidified magma. At the joints of its broad and sturdy torso, hideous and terrifying magma spikes could be seen clearly. Facing the ferociously pouncing black mamba snake, Grimm, who had transformed into a new type of Balrog, raised his neck and roared fiercely. Thick black smoke and lingering flames spurted out from his mouth and nostrils. The terrifying might was shocking. Die! After a short declaration of war, the two equally terrifying huge bodies collided with each other. Boom! A loud, dull sound echoed. Following that, a violent shockwave rippled out like ripples on water. All the giant trees, grass, and flames that were hit by the shockwave were crushed into powder and thrown away. The two gigantic bodies were tightly entwined with each other as they tumbled and bumped into each other as they charged into the distance. The black mamba snake raised its long neck and let out a long hiss of pain. Its body that was tightly wrapped around the Balrog's torso looked like it was wrapped around a scarlet magma pillar. The scales and flesh on its body looked like they were being roasted on fire, emitting thick black smoke. The snake's body was burnt red. Even so, it did not loosen its grip. Instead, it forcefully contracted its muscles, causing the Balrog's torso to creak. It coiled its body, and its huge snake head slithered in front of the Balrog's flaming head. The snake's eyes stared at the Balrog's eyes that were filled with raging flames. A khaki-colored, petrifying power spread towards Grimm's spirit sea through the spiritual connection. If the Eye of Petrification was used carelessly, it would only petrify the opponent's outer shell. To paralyze the opponent's resistance, it would depend on the strength of the opponent's resistance. However, if the Eye of Petrification could directly enter the opponent's spirit sea through the spiritual connection, the opponent would instantly lose all ability to resist and become a fish on a chopping board. The Balrog, Grimm, who was wrapped up in the Eye of Petrification, was not willing to sit still and wait for death. It reached out and grabbed the snake's neck, roaring madly as it urged the abyss fire in its body to burn the snake's body. At the same time, the power of flames surged up and shot out from its burning eyes. The khaki-colored Eye of Petrification and the dazzling scarlet sun fire collided fiercely between their eyes. The point of collision swayed in the air, moving in Grimm's direction and the giant snake wizard's direction. Every time it deviated slightly in a certain direction, it would cause one of them to roar madly, followed by a burst of force. The giant snake wizard and the Balrog wizard were entangled together, rolling and fighting in a sea of lava. The terrifying power of the Eye of Petrification was also fiercely clashing with each other. For a moment, they were evenly matched. In a corner of the dark forest, the bloody butcher, who had been beaten miserably, gulped down large and small bottles of healing potions and recovery potions. He also used all kinds of witchcraft and treasures that could speed up the recovery of his flesh and blood. Unfortunately, as a physique refinement wizard, his body's potential had been excavated to the extreme, so most of the healing and stimulating potions had little effect on him. They were far less effective than other wizards. With great difficulty, he used his own blood pressure to extinguish the flames on his body. After a series of treatments, the Bloody Butcher's injuries stabilized. As the unbearable numbness and pain spread through his limbs and bones, the muscles on his body wriggled crazily to repair themselves. His condition was no longer as miserable and terrifying as it was before. The Bloody Butcher stood in the darkness while urging his blood pressure to quickly repair his damaged body. He used his only remaining eye to observe the battle in the distance. In the blink of an eye, the battle between the two sides had already covered a distance of 3 miles. Amidst the sea of flames and earth-shattering explosions, the two sides were locked in a fierce battle. It was a ghastly sight. The Bloody Butcher was secretly shocked as he watched the battle. If Grimm used this method right from the start of the battle, how long would he be able to last in the lava world of the terrifying Balrog? A quarter of an hour or half an hour? Not to mention Grimm's terrifying Balrog body after transforming. Just the abyss fire and high-temperature flames surrounding his body would be enough to make him suffer. Although the Balrog was not famous for its strength, it still had 12 or 3 points of strength and a terrifyingly strong vitality. If he really had to fight such a terrifying opponent to the death, the Bloody Butcher felt that he would definitely become cannon fodder. Although the Bloody Butcher had 17 points of vitality and 14 points of strength, he was still considered an elite wizard among the Grade 1 wizards. However, he knew very well that even elite wizards were divided into different ranks. Elite wizards who had just crossed the threshold of 10 points in their basic stats were often called pseudo-elites. They might be able to unleash extraordinary abilities in some areas, but their overall coordination was not good, and they were not stable enough. Therefore, they could not be considered as real elite wizards. Only those who had all their basic stats above 10 points could be considered as real elite wizards. They were often the main force of the big families in foreign wars. Whether it was a planar war or a family war, they were always the ones who rushed to the front line. Seriously speaking, the Bloody Butcher was also one of these people. Although his vitality had exceeded the threshold of 15 points and reached 17 points, his strength, agility, and spiritual force were still lagging behind. Above him were the elite wizards who had all their basic stats above 15 points. They were usually the reserve power of the wizard families to break through to Grade 2 wizards. They were usually hidden and rarely appeared in the outside world. However, once such a person appeared, he would be able to crush regular elite magi in all aspects. Therefore, when he suddenly saw 2 wizards of this level fighting in front of him, the Bloody Butcher felt an indescribable shock and fear from his soul to his body. "What are you waiting for? Come and help me." All of a sudden, a voice exploded in the Bloody Butcher's mind. Judging from the voice, it was the giant snake wizard who was fighting with his life on the line. The Bloody Butcher grinned ferociously as he looked at the 2 big guys who were fighting each other in the distance. He did not care that his movement had once again torn the muscles and tendons on his face that had just healed. Blood dripped down his cheeks again. The Bloody Butcher waved his hand, and the 2-handed sword that had been knocked away returned to his hand with a bloody glow. The Bloody Butcher let out a roar as he looked at the terrifying fire demon, who was entangled by the giant snake's body and couldn't move at all. His whole body was shrouded in a bloody aura, and he looked like a god that had descended from the heavens. The Balrog, Grimm, who was in the middle of a fierce battle, felt the ground tremble slightly. His face, which was covered in flames, immediately turned serious. With a burst of strength, the Balrog created some space for his body to move. The Balrog took out 2 bright crystals from his body and threw them towards the Bloody Butcher, who was running towards him. With this little bit of mental relaxation, the Black Mamba snake took the opportunity to tighten its body again. Grimm's Balrog body made a cracking sound, and many large cracks appeared on his body. Chapter 304. Damn it, hold on. Grimm roared madly. The Fire Lord's heart, which had been completely unsealed, began to beat rapidly in his broad and strong chest. The fire energy that was gushing out surged and circulated in his body, providing him with a steady stream of powerful energy. The balance of the battle that had been slightly out of balance was once again turned around by Grimm. Not far from them, the two bright crystals that Grimm had thrown out had just landed on the ground, and two terrifying demonic puppets with different appearances and abilities rose from the ground. The Rotting One and the Howling One. The Rotting One looked like a slime monster covered in green mucus. Its body was overflowing with a strange green fluorescence, and wherever it passed, the plants would wither and die, leaving behind a sticky, slippery, and poisonous path. The Howling One was a 5-meter-tall giant made of stone. When it charged forward with heavy footsteps that shook the earth, the whole ground trembled, making it difficult for people to stand straight. Normally, with Grimm's strength, after releasing the Inferno Tyrant, his remaining spiritual force would not be enough to support the Rotting One and the Howling One. This was the first time that 3 wizard-level demonic puppets had appeared on the battlefield at the same time. In the past, when he encountered a big battle, the Inferno Tyrant alone was enough to control the situation. Normal small fights could be easily settled by Grimm himself. Therefore, the 2 wizard-level demonic puppets, who were not as strong as him, had never had the chance to fight in the battlefield since they were born. However, today, the new Balrog transformation had increased Grimm's spiritual force, and his basic stats were all in red. Apart from his agility, all his other stats had rushed up to 15 points. Therefore, while he was supporting the Inferno Tyrant with all his strength, he also released the 2 secondary demonic puppets, the Rotting One and the Howling One. Facing the 2 wizard-level demonic puppets coming at him from the left and right, the Bloody Butcher was also on the verge of a mental breakdown. If he was in perfect condition, he would be able to take down these stupid elemental puppets, whose strength was only comparable to a newly advanced sorcerer, no matter how many of them there were. But if it was now, before he could get close to the Bloody Butcher, the Rotted One's slowly moving body suddenly shook, and a beam of green light shot toward the Bloody Butcher. At the same time, the giant stone golem that was striding forward suddenly threw a millstone-sized boulder at the Bloody Butcher's head. Damn, 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 damn. While cursing, the Bloody Butcher quickly waved his sword in both of his hands. 2 streams of blood-red chi flew out of the sword and shattered his opponent's attack. The stinky acidic venom was wrapped by the blood-colored energy and quickly covered the ground within a 50-meter radius. The forest, which had already been ravaged to the point where there wasn't an inch of skin left unscathed, was once again trampled by the terrifying soft feet. When the remaining grass and trees came into contact with the acid, they immediately let out sizzling sounds of corrosion. A strange, pungent smell filled the forest in an instant. The boulder that had exploded in mid-air was instantly smashed into thousands of pieces, flying in all directions. The stones that were filled with powerful energy were no weaker than arrows fired at close range. Wherever they hit, there would be obvious holes. Under normal circumstances, this kind of attack would not even be able to pass through the Bloody Butcher's protective blood aura. But now, when the blows landed on his wounds that were still healing quickly, he let out a muffled groan, suffering unspeakable pain. Not to mention helping the giant snake sorcerer. Even he himself was pushed back by the 2 magi puppets. He barely managed to hold on with the sword in his hand. Although Grimm could not split his attention to command the 2 magi puppets, the AI Chip could do it easily. Under the AI Chip's command, the Howlers rushed forward and acted as a meat shield, while the Rotted One hid behind and constantly shot arrows. The Bloody Butcher, who had lost a lot of his strength, could only use guerrilla tactics to barely deal with them. After releasing the Magi puppets to stabilize the situation, Grimm immediately focused on fighting the the Black Mamba snake. If the Black Mamba was a genuine ancient snake monster, Grimm would have run as far away as he could, not wanting to tangle with it any longer. After all, in all the books, snake-type monsters were known for their stamina and were good at grinding their enemies to death. But now, the one fighting Grimm was only a giant snake sorcerer's bloodline transformation. Like Grimm's Balrog transformation, there was a time limit. Moreover, the more intense the battle, the more bloodline energy would be consumed, and the shorter the duration of the bloodline transformation. Under normal circumstances, Grimm's magic rune transformation would definitely take far less time than his opponent's bloodline transformation. But now, with the Balrog's heart continuously supplying pure fire energy, the consumption of maintaining the Balrog transformation was much lower. Hence, he had the capital to fight the enemy head-on, using brute force to defeat the enemy. As a Balrog famous for its violent fire energy, Grimm also wanted to run far away with a flame leap and blast the enemy into pieces with a thunder smoke cannon. However, he had released 3 wizard rank magic puppets, and one of them was the Inferno Tyrant that was not inferior to an elite wizard. More than 80% of Grimm's power of the will had been used up. The remaining power of the will was barely enough to support a flame barrier, desperately roasting the snake's body. As for other spells, he was sorry. Even if he could free up his hands, he would not be able to use them. Of course, there were still 6 large-scale spells hidden in the secret voodoo scroll in the Balrog body that he could use for free. But in the current situation, he really could not free up his hands. Grimm's Balrog transformation grabbed the Black Mamba snake's long neck with a pair of giant flaming hands, barely pulling it away. Only then did he not let the snake bite him with its terrifying fangs. The battle between the eyes of petrification and the burning eye continued, causing both sides to overflow with uncontrollable damage. A large area of dark spots appeared on Grimm's Balrog body that was surrounded by flames. A thin layer of stone spread over his body, repeatedly fighting with the power of the flames for control of his body. As for the Black Mamba giant snake, it was almost cooked. A strong smell of meat wafted over the battlefield, mixed with a strong, burnt stench. Clusters of crimson flames danced on the giant snake's body, faintly spreading into a large area. On its long neck, the scorch marks left by the flaming sun rays crisscrossed, looking extremely miserable. At this moment, the giant snake wizard's heart was full of hatred. In the 100 years he had spent in the Scattered Tower Forest, every time he transformed into the terrifying Black Mamba snake, it was the best time for him to dominate the battlefield. Fine gray snake scales covered its entire body from head to toe, not leaving a single inch of its body unprotected. These snake scales were as hard as enchanted giant tower shields, and they also had indescribable magic resistance. Therefore, after transforming, the Black Mamba snake was simply a bulldozer covered in thick armor. It could use its powerful strength, long life, and super strong defense to crush all enemies into pieces. The bloodline of the Black Mamba snake was not without flaws. However, its flaws were not something that anyone could grasp. Without a strong physique that could resist the giant snake's charge, entanglement, and petrification, even if one knew its flaws, it would be difficult to make use of them, let alone defeat it. Therefore, for a period of time, as the giant snake wizard, he had become a headache for almost all elite wizards. But what he didn't expect was that today, in this extremely simple assassination mission, he would actually encounter a guy who was strong enough to fight against his giant snake transformation. And the other party, in the information, the other party was actually labeled as a newly advanced wizard. While entangling with the terrifying Balrog, the giant snake wizard had the urge to tear the person who introduced the mission into pieces countless times. Damn it, was there a newly advanced wizard in the world with such strength? Many times, the giant serpent Magus even suspected that someone was plotting against him, purposely pushing him into such a difficult situation. If he could, the giant snake wizard would have long wanted to leave this battlefield. However, before the battle started, the wrong information had led him to mistakenly believe that it would be a simple, one-sided battle. That was why he dashed over so boldly, trying to rely on his physical strength to crush the enemy and quickly kill him. But when the two sides were entangled together, he painfully discovered that it was extremely difficult for him to break away from it. Both sides were tightly entangled together, using strength to resist. If either side were to slack off, it would trigger a crazy counterattack from the other party. If he were to relax, even a little, the giant flame claws that were tightly gripping his neck would break through and tear his snake body apart. The other party's terrifying flames would also mercilessly enter his body, completely turning him into a dead snake that was roasted from the inside out. There were countless times in the past when the giant snake wizard wanted to give up his pointless pride and dignity and take the initiative to reconcile with the other party. After all, it was just a meaningless hunting mission. After all, there was no real enmity between him and the other party. After all, however, just as countless thoughts lingered in the giant snake wizard's mind, there was a flicker of light and shadow in the distant void. Two figures, one tall and one short, appeared in the field again. The tall flame body was, of course, the Inferno tyrant who was sealed in the illusory barrier, and the short one was, of course, the beautiful illusionist with a voluptuous figure. The battle with the Inferno tyrant in the dimensional space was obviously not going well. After all, the elemental demon mantis was not susceptible to any charm or illusory effects. Therefore, as soon as they flew out of the dimensional space, the beautiful illusionist shouted with a sharp and ear-piercing voice, "Did the two of you finish the target? Hurry up and help." Her words came to an abrupt halt. Looking around, the scene in the field caused her beautiful eyes to widen. She almost could not believe her own eyes. "What are you doing? Why are you fighting like this?" In the depths of the forest in the distance, a 10-meter-long, terrifying giant snake coiled around the body of a 5-meter-tall, giant inferno demon. Both sides were rolling and fighting in the continuous sea of fire and pool of lava. Every strike could be said to be earth-shattering and could trigger terrifying elemental waves that were like the roar of mountains and the roar of tsunamis. If this side was still considered to be evenly matched, then the other side was a little too tragic to look at. A strange demon mantis that looked like a green sludge monster cooperated with a tall stone person and was chasing that bloody butcher all over the world. Meanwhile, the latter was covered in cuts and bruises from the strange sorcery of the first two. His body was covered in green and purple patches, and he was even limping. His entire appearance was beyond miserable. And just as the beautiful illusionist was stunned on the spot, the Inferno tyrant, who had broken free from the entanglement of the illusory spell, roared and raised his hands high. A large-scale fire sorcery was about to be released in an instant. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.